The chubby boy swung the sword violently. He didn't want to be ignored anymore, but in a moment of carelessness, he tripped over his own fat, and the sword ended up piercing his gut. That's how bariatric surgery was invented. He didn't die, or maybe he did.
Está muerto. No respira.
But that fat bum will become a ruthless and monstrously strong prince. He will beat his brother to a pulp and even get engaged to a hot 1,000-year-old elf. Besides being beautiful, she is one of, if not the strongest person in the entire kingdom. After that day with the sword, he changed completely. And you want to know why? The main protagonist of this story was the sword that impaled the boy and not the chubby one. It had many owners for centuries. It was the sword that forged the heroes who were part of the world's stories. And along the way, he made a friend, a boy born in a rural village with the surname Leonberger. Together, they did something no one else had done. They defeated a giant dragon from the frozen mountains. After that, Leonberg became the sovereign of the country. Meanwhile, Gruhan, the legendary dragon-slaying sword, was stored away, along with his friend's request to take care of his descendants. That's when he woke up from his sleep. Some idiot was swinging him around. The fat one shouted that from today on he would be the master of the sword, and then swung it violently. But Gruhan, when using his ability, realized that he was actually a descendant of his friend, even though he was a pig that walks on 2 legs. The fat one only wanted recognition from the nobles, and maybe to be able to refill his lunch more than 8 times. He thought he would get that with Gruhan's strength, but after swinging the sword for a few minutes, he tripped over his own fat and fell. The problem is that he never imagined that this would be the sword that would perform a bariatric surgery on him. Descendant of Gruhan's friend or not, we have to admit that this guy earned the title of the dumbest I've ever seen. He even stayed there blaming the sword. No one wanted him as future king, because he is greedy and arrogant. This was the gluttonous and stupid Prince Adrian Leonberger, but everything started to change after he impaled himself with a sword. Rumors quickly spread that he no longer knocked over and broke the dining table, and no longer hung out with bandits. But in his room, the thoughts were different. Gruhan was shocked to realize that he had killed his friend's descendant and taken possession of his body, whether he liked it or not. Now he had become the rebellious prince. Oh, and a pig too, we can't forget that.
Rodolfo, está muerto.
The maid warned that his master had come to visit him, but he got angry about it since the master hadn't come before. As for the master, on the other hand, he realized that even after almost dying, the prince is the same. He only came to fulfill his duty as a master, but the chubby one doesn't even know who he is, and ended up using the accident as an excuse to say he has amnesia. Suddenly, the vassals announced that the majesty has arrived. The king, father of the pig, entered the place. Adrian is impressed because the king looks more imposing than he imagined. The king thought he was the same as well, since he didn't greet him when he arrived. However, everyone says that Adrian lost his memories. Soon the doctor arrived to examine him. There is nothing physically wrong with him besides the 300 pounds of fat. Maybe it is just a temporary symptom due to psychological shock. The king just says that this is too convenient. It's not like everything he has done would disappear just because he forgot. And of course he will be kept locked in the castle for a while because of this. He needs to be locked up and not eat to see if he loses weight. Anyway, he wanted to know what that guy had done. And at that very moment, his mother hugs Adrian, saying he must be very confused, but his memory should return soon. Right away, you could already tell the difference in treatment between the father and the mother, my guy. And then she says she's happy to see him waking up like this. Anyway, you mustn't touch dangerous things anymore, because she doesn't know what she would have done if he hadn't woken up. But my friend, poor thing, she has no idea that her son is already dead. There's nothing that can be done now, right? And a little later, his mother says she'll come visit him, then tells him to get plenty of rest for now. Adrian was trying to process everything that had happened, thinking that his friend had asked him so much to take care of his descendants, and he ended up killing one. And even if it wasn't intentional, he still did it. Since it happened, there's nothing to be done, so he'll live well for his sake. Before, he reincarnated as a sword and spent his life cleaning up other people's messes, and now he's in a fat body with no talent. But that doesn't matter, because he just has to use brute force again, because he had already trained a bunch of children. First of all, it's necessary to refine the mana heart, and out of nowhere, the guy draws in air feeling his mana heart. At the same time, the magic comes undone, and the chubby kid realizes that mana flows, but unfortunately his body can't handle it. He tries to do the same thing a few times, but unfortunately nothing works, wondering what kind of body that was. If he had his original body, he could force the mana into it. Right after that, a maid appears saying that this is a special medicine sent by the queen. The woman didn't seem very happy, thinking that she hoped he wouldn't throw the cup again. At that moment, our boy is surprised realizing that there was mana in that cup too. And without wasting time, the kid starts drinking the medicine. The maid is surprised because the boy had literally drunk all of it. Then the protagonist summons his mana heart once more, thinking that, fortunately, that had worked. For sure, it's still far too little and will dissipate in a day. But of course, that'll only happen if he allows it, asking the maid if there isn't any more of that medicine. With that, a few days pass, and the protagonist was overjoyed because he was finally going to be able to create a mana heart. He had done this many times before, and out of nowhere, the kid starts feeling pain in his body. Suddenly, a flashback appears, and Adrian remembers that creating a mana heart always came came with enormous pain. To make matters worse, he can't lose consciousness because if he passes out there, the mana will flow in reverse. At that, the kid concentrates even more, beginning the process of creating the mana heart. And a little later, he seemed to have achieved what he wanted. With everything settled, Idrian thinks that this isn't something he made for someone else, but a mana heart that is his alone. At that very moment, a system window appears, informing him that the so-called mana heart had finally been created. Idrian thinks that this is just like the status messages he used to send to his owners when he was a sword, wondering why it had appeared to him now. At the same time, a bunch of system messages appear, informing him that the connection to the origin is being restored. And while he was gaining some buffs, there were also some skills that were still locked. He starts looking around, realizing that his vision had improved. The same goes for his ears, because he can hear the sound from outside the door too. Suddenly, our boy feels something, and the system warns that all the mana in his body has been exhausted. Idrian thinks that now he understands what was limited in him, because that absolute sword sense that perceived everything in all directions with no blind spots no longer exists. And for now, just by using a small amount of mana, he can hear outside the door, or see things a little better. But if he increases his mana capacity, there should definitely be some change, right? But there's no way to do that right now, right since he was starving and the chubby kid couldn't take it anymore. First of all, he has to adapt to being human. And a little later, the kid's mother was happy that he had drunk all the medicine without leaving anything. Besides that, he was valuing his own body. And at that very moment, someone appears there. His mother asks if he knows who that guy is, and he replies that it seems the boy really did lose his memory. The queen says that's why her brother should help that child, because in any case, he's his only nephew, right? And observing the situation, Idrian thinks that just by looking at him, you can already tell he doesn't like him. And then the man says he'll make this clear right away, that the only thing he can do is help him lose some of that fat. He can't do anything beyond that, so he shouldn't get his hopes up. And the queen says that's already enough. And a little later, my friend, the protagonist, was suffering in training. His uncle says that from now on, eating, drinking, and even breathing must have his permission, and if he expects princely treatment, he should give up on that now. The only thing he can do is work hard, and if he changes his mind, he might even teach him a little of his family's secret swordsmanship. Hearing that, of course, the boy was furious, because he wanted to teach the instructor who had taught the invincible knight and the master of that country's founding king. And if that's the case, then they should make a bet. In 6 months, he'll make him acknowledge him, thinking that first he needs to break that arrogant look once and for all. If he fails, he'll do anything he tells him to do, and in return, if he succeeds, he'll have to grant one of his wishes. Hearing that, the old man is surprised, but ends up accepting it, because he also needs something to entertain himself with, right? Meanwhile, Idrian thinks he had spoken quite well, but unfortunately that big body doesn't help. Having no other choice, he'll have to use mana, and first he needs to focus on burning the fat from his entire body. The old man kept watching all of that, and immediately smacks the kid, asking if he had created a mana heart. And with a smile on his face, he says he managed to do it not long ago, asking if he already regrets his bet. But actually, the old man asks what was going through his head to do something like that, wanting to know where he learned to refine a mana heart, and apparently he doesn't even know what he did wrong. After all, the mana heart is a low-level technique that only fifth-rate mercenaries learn. And then, my friend, of course the kid didn't understand a damn thing, thinking that this is definitely the end times, asking what he means by that, and the old man says it's faster to show him in person, telling him to watch carefully. Our boy is surprised because that there is basically mana in the shape of a ring. At the same time, the energy grows larger, shattering the protagonist's mana. And then the old man says that the mana current has the property of destroying the sword energy of the mana heart, and besides that, it is much easier and more stable than the mana heart. Even Count Eli's family, which insisted on the mana heart, completely fell 100 years ago, and now no one wants to use that ability anymore. Thus, time passes and our boy was reading some books, realizing that times really had changed. Mages use magic circles while knights weave currents to gather mana, and a knight's level is divided according to the number of currents woven, ranging from a single current to a quintuple current. It doesn't seem like something so absurd. And, continuing to read the book, he finds a name called Altringen. The boy is surprised, thinking that a long time ago, a guy who used a strange technique, neither a swordsman's nor even a mage's, once came looking for him. Honestly, he thought the name sounded very familiar, wondering what had happened to him. A little later, the protagonist seemed to be training, and his uncle asks if he read the book last night, which means that by now he should have understood the situation and how foolish his choice was. And the kid, full of confidence, says he doesn't think at all that he made any mistake. Not every mana heart is the same, asking if he has ever heard of the difference in levels. His uncle asks what he is talking about, mentioning that among mercenaries, there are some like him. Basically, they are those who delude themselves into thinking they are heroes from hundreds of years ago, asking if he knows what happened to all of them. They couldn't surpass even 2 currents and were completely defeated. But if the boy is different from those people, then he has to defeat a double current knight. If he does that, he will be his guardian, as his mother wishes. And hearing that, our hero asks whether having his uncle as his guardian would really be a good thing. At that moment, everyone falls silent, and the uncle seemed to get a little irritated, saying that he is a count of the kingdom and commander of the Northern Army. One of the 5 silver lions who follow his majesty man. The guy has a ton of titles. He's also a 4-ring knight and has a few more, but I'll only mention these because I'm too lazy. And his name is Baal Valohard, and who exactly could possibly outrank him, asking if those qualifications are enough already. And at that very moment, all the soldiers raise their swords, telling Valohard to step back. Man, this guy really is a beast. The two of them stand there staring each other down, and a short while later, the protagonist was completely worn out, and his uncle says that's enough for today. A few minutes later, our hero was walking through the castle thinking he had almost been killed. Then he opens a door and someone says he had been waiting for him. Idrian remembers that he is the royal physician, and the man says he doesn't know what to do with his highness, remembering someone so humble. In any case, he wants to know what he came there for, and the physician says the queen ordered him to use healing magic on him. He invokes the spell, but Idrian, without wasting any time, already throws the guy out of his room, saying that this is basically throwing all of today's effort in the trash. Meanwhile, a knight was watching everything Idrian did and seemed quite surprised, right? At that same moment, a kid opens the door asking if his brother is there. He stares at the protagonist, and meanwhile the brat was eating, wanting to know who that idiot is. And then, the knight at his side whispers in his ear that it was the 3rd prince. Right after that, the preppy one says he heard that he suffered an accident, but unfortunately, it seems he was more intact than he thought. The protagonist says it seems the prince has nothing better to do, asking if he only came there to provoke him. Damn, he's really looking for a fight. At once, the prince gets pissed, thinking that he's just an idiot who stabbed a sword into his own body, mentioning that he heard some interesting news. Apparently, he made a bet with Count Valohard and is even going to duel a double current knight. And if that's the case, I wanted to know if I could be your opponent. Whoa, things are starting to heat up. A little later, Idrian was wondering what that had been just now, and whether all of Leon Berger's descendants were like that. Suddenly, that knight says that Prince Gilliam has been famous for his talent with the sword since childhood. After all, having 2 rings at just 14 years old is an impressive feat. At that very moment, a maid appears saying that some letters have arrived for him. The kid had no idea what was going on, and then, when he looks at the letters, every single one of them is a request to duel the boy. After all, it's a chance to beat up that idiot legally, right? Of course our boy wasn't going to back down, and calling over the maid, he asks her to write down the names of all those people. A short while later, the protagonist was training, and his uncle tells him to pick up the sword. First of all, he has to know at least the basics for the bet to count, and he doesn't want to hear excuses later about losing just because he didn't know the basics. Accepting all that, Idrian picks up the sword from the ground, but then he immediately feels something, and, my friend, that's called muscle pain. His uncle is surprised, asking if he hadn't received healing magic, but then the protagonist says that, as a knight, he should know very well that if he received that, his muscles would only return to normal and wouldn't grow. Hearing that, Valohard simply accepts it in silence, and then picks up the sword, saying that he won't show it many times, so he has to pay attention. This is the training style that the kingdom's knights learn when building their foundation. Then he begins to demonstrate the swordsmanship with all his skill. Man, the guy really is good. The protagonist can only watch in surprise, wondering. Just now he said, this is the swordsmanship the kingdom's knights learn when building their foundation. Valohard says that, since it is a sword style faithful to the basics, there is no better swordsmanship to start with, and considering his talent, that is already more than enough. Hearing that, the protagonist immediately starts laughing, thinking that no matter how much time had passed, that swordsmanship that killed the mad dragon being treated as a training style was impressive. Next, his uncle says that of course, that alone won't be enough to win the bet. So after learning the basics, he has to ask his mother to hire another master, but then the boy says there's no need. He's not going to learn another sword style after all. This one is already enough, right? Hearing that, the man is surprised, but says he can do whatever he wants. Without wasting time, our hero starts training, thinking that it was impressive for the current dragon-slaying sword to be treated like an insignificant training sword. Honestly, he doesn't want to admit it, but it's a natural phenomenon, because in that dragon-slaying sword, the will to cut dragons hangs within it. They simply abandoned the mana heart, and for those who forgot how to infuse a sword with will, there's no way they could have the eyes to recognize the true value of the dragon-slaying sword. At that very moment, Valohard draws his sword, blocking the protagonist's strike, saying that just putting strength into your arm doesn't mean that strength goes into the sword. Well, at least he's teaching him properly. Right? He points out the parts of the boy's body, mentioning that he has to apply strength correctly throughout his whole body in order to wield the sword properly. Hearing all that, the boy simply gets back up, thinking that even if this was now a weak body that could barely imitate the false dragon-slaying sword, he would personally prove that it was not a sword to be cast aside as if it were nothing. And so, my friend, the days went by, and even weeks. With that, a month passed and the system appears, saying that after arduous training, he managed to change his constitution. The trait of immense obesity changed to ordinary obesity, and his metabolism became more active with the change in constitution, getting somewhat more used to using the body in repetitive training. Little by little, the guy's going to start becoming built like a tank, my friend thinking that he is wielding the sword more naturally than he was a month ago. Also, obviously, becoming more powerful with each passing day, but at that very moment, his furious uncle says that he had already told him to stop. The boy's sword falls to the ground, and then that awkward silence hangs in the air. The protagonist's hand was already bleeding from training so much, then his uncle approaches, and Adrian, looking to the sideman, the training dummy had been completely destroyed. It looked like lightning had struck in the middle of that rain, and then his uncle says that if it had been a real sword, he wouldn't have escaped that accident. The kid just listens to everything in silence, and looking at his hand, it was completely calloused. At that very moment, the system appears, informing him that he has reached a state of extreme concentration. On the spot, he collapses unconscious to the ground, and Valohard merely watches his nephew, saying that he is an idiot, and little by little he is earning the man's respect. A short while later, our hero had already woken up, realizing that he had lost consciousness. Anyway, before, he didn't know the limits of that body. As a sword, he had already achieved every possible accomplishment, having been wielded by various heroes. He brought wars to glory and elevated the level of body and soul, and guided the path of all those people. His name was Gruhan, and he was a wise advisor and an exceptional teacher. But in any case, his existence had always been only that of a third party. That is why he kept swinging his sword until he reached that point, blinded by the feeling of making the sweat, the effort, and all the results entirely his own. If this keeps up, this weak body will break sooner or later, so he needs to balance everything, right? It has already been a month since he created his mana heart, and he has accumulated mana during that time, so now he can move on to the next stage. The boy then begins to concentrate, and the system informs him that after constant training, he managed to accumulate a certain level of mana, and can now withstand a little more. Thus, his mana heart expands, gradually getting better. The kid opens his eyes, and the results of his training are already starting to show little by little. Without wasting any time, of course, the young man was going to grab his sword, and the system informs him that he has reached the level of sword apprentice. In addition, he can already do the basics because he is now capable of using aura at the most common stage. A short while later, Adrian was at the training grounds when his uncle appeared, saying that the rumors were spreading throughout the kingdom. All thanks to that damn bet, asking whether it would not be better to quickly find an opponent to duel, and Adrian says that as for that, he has already decided who it will be. Even so, it will be difficult to face a double current all at once, so it would be better to first fight people with a single current. Right then, Adrian calls over the knight beside him, who says he has already arranged everything Adrian asked for. Those there are the list of duel requests for him, and the man asks whether he intends to hold the practice duels. Most of those people hold a grudge against him and may try to harm him by taking advantage of the duel. But our boy already knew that, my friend. And for that reason, his uncle will be the judge. He's not asking for anything so grand. He just wants him to stop anyone from dying during the duel, asking if he could do him that little favor, right? With that, a day passes, and the moment of the duel finally arrives. The first participant was already at the castle gate, thinking that the bastard first prince was there. That guy's name is Taylor, and he is the second son of an ordinary noble family. But a few years ago, his father and his brother were insulted in an unforgettable way by that guy. Because of that, the family's honor fell to the ground, and his father and brother became the target of mockery from the nobles even to this day. And because of that, my friend, he is going to make Adrian pay dearly for what he did that day, and then he greets the prince, saying that his name is Taylor and that he is a single current knight, and Adrian says there is no need for so much formality in a training match that is not even official. Even so, he wants to know whether that guy is really a knight because he seems very weak. Right away, Taylor gets furious, thinking that, just like the rumors say, this guy is very arrogant. At that very moment, Valohard appears, saying that he understands how he feels, but the duel has not even started yet, asking him to withdraw his aura, and that guy seemed to admire Valohard a lot, saying that it is an honor to meet him. Seeing that, Adrian says that it seemed like he was the one being treated like a prince, and his uncle says that then he should have behaved better in daily life. Anyway, the duel is about to begin, and the two stare at each other. Taylor then activates his aura, and without wasting any time, charges straight at our boy, who then summons his mana heart, managing to block the strike. Taylor is surprised that Adrian is using that swordsmanship style, and at the same time, he backs away. In surprise, he says that a mana heart cannot block a mana current, and Adrian asks if that is only happening because he is a one-current knight. At that very moment, everyone is surprised by something, and Valohard thinks that this is the so-called Song of the Sword. Meanwhile, Taylor could not believe that his attack had been blocked, charging at Adrian once again. The kid merely watches Taylor's movements, but in any case, blocks the strike once again. They stay like that for a while until Taylor ends up getting tired. Our boy was also panting, thinking that they say current mana is the opposite of the heart, and that really is true. Honestly, it feels like his mana is going to start flowing backward at any moment. Changing the subject, he asks if he said he was the second son of Baron Tailheim. Anyway, he needs to cool his head, and closing his eyes, the boy enters a trance. He tells something to awaken, thinking that the demonic sword or divine sword is part of his soul. Right then, that huge dragon awakens, and Idrian thinks that this is the sword's memory and the essence of the heart, refined to bring down dragons. Basically, the true power of the dragon-slaying sword, man, he is actually managing to do that in a body like this. At the same time, that blessed power rises to the surface, and Taylor was trying to process what was happening. At that very moment, Valohard tells them to stop the duel. But my friend, Idrian was not listening to any of that and lunges at the boy. Out of nowhere, a flashback appears with the protagonist telling his uncle that he has a request. If it looks like he is going to kill his opponent, then he absolutely has to stop him. And that is exactly what happened, my friend. The poor protagonist was thrown far away. Valohard was not there to play around. And man, the kid was completely wrecked on the ground. At that very moment, all the soldiers restrained the man, saying that what he just did could, depending on the circumstances, be considered attempted murder of royalty. But then Idrian stands up and tells them to back off because it was his request. Even so, he hadn't asked him to knock him out. And at that very moment, the boy loses consciousness. A short while later, he had already woken up, thinking that his uncle's strength really is on another level and can't even be compared to some single-core trash. Fortunately, he doesn't seem to be hurt, and in the end, everything worked out because he won the duel. At that very moment, his uncle appears, asking what he had done. On top of that, he wants to know what that impure sword was, because he never taught him anything like that. And the protagonist confidently says that he was only being true to the essence of the sword. Hearing that, Valohard falls silent, then he asks if the essence of the sword he imagines is that killing intent. It really is unsettling, but even so, it is still one of the truths. Our boy is surprised on the spot, saying he thought he was going to lecture him, saying that the path of the sword is its own refinement. But my friend, the man says he is not a knight but a soldier, and someone who walks the path of victory, not the righteous path. However, his sword is excessive, and if his killing intent is excessive, he will not distinguish friend from foe. In any case, he will just watch to see whether or not he will be devoured by his inner demons. After that mess, 3 days pass, and Idrian was still training with that guy, asking if his name is Taylor, mentioning that he did an excellent job all these days. After all, defending against a sword that can't control its killing intent for 3 days straight is truly impressive. Right after that, the brat calls the maid, who then brings over a chest, saying that he heard she did something unforgivable in the past, and he doesn't know if this will make him feel any better. But either way, she should deliver this to her father. With the training coming to an end, Idrian says he can leave thinking that he has no obligation to clean up the mess that bastard made. But if he made someone work, it's only fair to pay the price. And so time passes, and the prince's duels became a topic throughout the kingdom. Honestly, I can't say whether his reputation is improving or not. And even after waiting for days, the news people were expecting definitely did not come. The knight's opinion of him was starting to change, and the royal family was probably keeping them quiet. However, the protagonist didn't seem very happy about that, saying they were just embarrassed that they lost to him and shut their mouths. These nobles really have nothing better to do and should do something productive with their time. And hearing that, Valohard says he has no right to say something like that. At that, the boy looks at the knight standing beside him, saying that when he leaves, he has to spread the result of the duel too. That way the rumors should definitely calm down. And at that very moment, the maid appears, saying there's a rumor that he used the sword's power to fake the result of today's duel. And hearing that, Idrian only gets more irritated, saying he'll just forget about it and keep training. Right. He does a few sequences of strikes, and his mana heart seemed to be getting stronger. Next, he asks how many opponents are still left, and the knight says there's only one more today. Idrian says the apprentice knights don't make much difference anymore, but the guy says the last one is a knight who truly learned the sword. He wasn't satisfied with merely polishing the family sword. He is also a talent who joined an order of knights to train with the sword. His name is Arwen Kurgayan, and just by entering the castle, all the soldiers start looking at her. She has a bunch of nicknames, from Cliff Flower to Thorny Rose, and she's the one said to have broken many men's hearts. She is certainly a remarkable woman, and to make even someone like her come there of her own accord, the prince must have incredible skill. In any case, it would be very interesting if, in the end, the prince got beaten by her. What's this? Are you rooting against your own side? The Order of Knights, called Iron Lion, is a place that competes for the top in the kingdom in terms of fame and skill. Basically, it's a promise that the person would already have a guaranteed spot as an official member. Next, Idrian asks why a genius like that would want to duel with him. He is told that he had a small misunderstanding with her in the past, and the protagonist immediately realizes he had already done something bad. And looking at one of the maids, he asks what exactly he did. She says that he kind of insulted her, and right away, the brat gets pissed at his own body. Then a flashback appears with Idrian holding the girl by the shoulder, saying that, just like the rumors say, she is rather interesting, asking if she wanted to become his personal servant. At that very moment, she removes the fatty's hand from her shoulder, saying that the Order of Knights is not his property. Then, my friend, of course the fatty was going to throw a fit, calling her ugly. And back in the present, after hearing everything, Adrian falls silent, thinking there's no way anyone could look at that and call it ugly. Next, the girl greets the protagonist, saying it's been a long time, but he hasn't changed at all. The girl didn't seem very happy, and Adrian thinks it's all his fault. Right after that, Valohard appears, staring at the girl. She then greets Valohard, saying that she is a knight apprentice of the Order of the Iron Lion Knights. Next, the man asks them to be careful with the prince's sword, because it is quite poisonous. Look at that. Another one rooting against his own side. With everything settled, the duel is finally about to begin. Without wasting any time, the girl draws her sword, and Adrian thinks that he is about to see the skill of the famous rising star of the Iron Lion. At that very moment, the girl charges straight at him. He thinks that her movements really are impressive. He manages to block the strike, but at the same time, his mana was about to flow. On the contrary, the girl watches Adrian's movements beginning to unleash a sequence of strikes. Our boy thinks he is being completely overwhelmed, and at this rate, he cannot keep going. She charges again, and at that same instant, Adrian activates that dragon-slaying skill. Arwen notices it immediately, and this time, Adrian manages to deflect the attack. At that, she finally steps back, wondering what kind of sword that was. Adrian says that it seems having a current does not mean they are all the same, and, without a doubt, she is on a different level from the other mediocre ones. He uses the system to analyze the girl, wondering if he can see that with his limited power, it means she is an opponent equal to or weaker than him. In any case, now it is for real, and, at the same time, the two charge at each other. With that, time passes and everyone was exhausted. Valohard then draws his sword, saying that is enough for today, and the duel will continue tomorrow. Adrian says he was just about to finish this, and the girl says that is a coincidence because she was just about to do the same. The two keep bickering with each other, and Valohard tells them to stop this mess because it is already very late and their injuries must be treated quickly. At that very moment, the doctors appear there casting healing magic, and Adrian kept watching the girl, and surprisingly enough, she was doing the same. The two finally leave, and Adrian thinks that he absolutely will not lose. A considerable amount of time passes after that mess, and some soldiers say that the duel literally never ends. Today is already the third day, and honestly they are quite surprised because they had already heard about Arwen's skill, but your highness also has excellent ability. In any case, it would be good if the duel were decided today, right? Soon after, Adrian says that before fighting he has something to say. Arwen asks if he is not about to say he wants to apologize now because if that is the case, she definitely will not accept. However, the boy says that is not it, because since they are fighting so intensely, there should at least be a prize. If that is the case, the loser should grant one wish of the winner, and hearing that, the girl falls silent. The soldiers are surprised by that, saying that as a member of the royal family, that is unacceptable. But the brat could not care less, asking what she thinks, and she says that even though she is an apprentice, she is also a member of an order of knights loyal to the royal family, Leonberger. She would not dare commit such disrespect toward your highness, but if it is within what he allows, she will accept this bet. Hearing that, Adrian, without wasting any time, draws his sword, saying not to complain later. Boy, I can already tell this is not going to end well. The two continue the duel, and as always, they were evenly matched. Our boy seemed very excited about the fight, and then once again, he uses that ridiculously overpowered sword skill. The girl is surprised, thinking that until yesterday, that sword style was not this fast, assuming that he was probably hiding the full extent of his skill. The brat keeps up the sequence of strikes, and Arwen remained on the defensive. She steps back, seeming tired, and Adrian keeps pressing her. The brat just will not give the girl a break. He delivers another strike, and so at last, someone's sword goes flying into the air. The one who had been defeated was the knight, and the soldiers, seeing that, are shocked. Even Valohard could not believe it, and Adrian, full of confidence, says that he won the bet. And raising his sword, he says that he wants her. That escalated from 0 to 100 really fast. The position of escort knight to the infamous scoundrel first prince of the kingdom, contrary to what she had thought, was not that difficult. Although he seemed somewhat arrogant, he did not act maliciously after all, as the rumors said. And honestly, in fact, he was completely the opposite. The guy kept watching our hero train in the rain, telling the boy that under those conditions, it was very dangerous. And at that very moment, lightning strikes right in front of him, but Adrian did not even seem to notice it. And that was when she had a premonition that his highness would become a great person. The scene then returns to the present with the soldiers surprised by what our boy had asked for. The knight also could not believe it, wondering if she had misjudged that person. Hearing that, Arwen asks if that is what your highness truly desires. He replies that she is just an ordinary knight apprentice who failed to defeat a scoundrel prince. And that is why he wants the potential and future of the knight named Arwen Kurgayan. First of all, he needs a knight who would follow him, and not someone who would protect him by royal order, but rather one who belonged only to him, basically his own knight. In any case, she has considerable talent with the sword, once again asking the girl to be his knight. Hearing that, she remains silent, thinking that she had become the person she had always dreamed of being, but no one treated her like a knight, so she worked twice as hard as everyone else. And even after defeating all the apprentices, showing various results, she still couldn't become a true knight. But now things are different because someone wanted her potential as a future knight, wondering if he was really being serious. At that, Arwen asks him to promise one thing, that he should always treat her as a knight and not as a woman. If he does that, she will do whatever your highness wishes. The two of them stand there staring at each other, and so, Idrian promises to do so. Then the girl kneels down, saying that she will swear loyalty to Prince Idrian Leonberger, dedicating her sword and the rest of her life to your highness. Valohard simply watches everything in silence, and Idrian, raising his sword, says that in the name of Idrian Leonberger, he makes her his knight. With that, time passes, and that girl continued training. No one could believe that she had sworn loyalty to that idiot prince, assuming they even had some kind of relationship. Meanwhile, Idrian was listening to everything from afar, asking if, by any chance, the axis of evil was his past self. Yeah, it was basically that. The knight beside him was watching everything in silence, and soon after, he called the protagonist, discussing what he had said that day. More specifically, a few days earlier, on the last day of the duel. Idrian asks if he had been upset, but either way, it's the truth, because if an order came for him to go somewhere else, he would definitely go. Even so, if he wanted, he could make a vow later too, and the guy seemed to have taken that seriously, asking if he made that vow, would he accept it? But the boy quickly says no, because it wouldn't be interesting to raise him. The knight just laughs, saying he understands, and Idrian thinks he's being serious. A little later, our boy was reading a letter informing him that his suspension had ended, and now he would attend the next royal family banquet. The boy says he had been released a month and a half early, thinking that the last time the king had gone there, he seemed like he never wanted to see him again. Honestly, he doesn't understand what that man is thinking, and the knight asks if he isn't happy about the end of the suspension. But to Idrian, it makes no difference, because even if he leaves the palace, he has nowhere to go, and since he knows no one, he has no one to meet. Soon after, the other maid appears saying that another invitation has arrived for your highness. Idrian takes the letter, and while reading it asks what this so-called social club only for special young masters was. Wow, what a weird name. The maid says it was a club he was a member of, and the protagonist asks if it's a strange place, and just by looking at the girl's face, you can already tell it is, right? That place is nothing but parties and drinking, and Idrian, knowing what it was about, says to just leave it alone, because he's already busy training, right? However, when he reads the letter again, he realizes it was from a friend named Bernardo, from the Eli family. At the same time, Idrian remembers that, according to what his uncle had said, the family that clung to the Mana heart until the very end had fallen about 100 years ago, and unbelievably, it was exactly that one. And if that's the case, then he'll have to go to the party, right? And he hopes that family's situation wasn't quite that bad. With that, on the day that marked 4 months since he entered the body of the scoundrel prince, he had started training and was constantly losing weight. And man, I'm gonna be honest, the guy looked like a completely different person now. He was really handsome. Our boy says he had lost quite a bit of weight, and the guy beside him says his measurements had shrunk by more than half. Idrian says he'll leave the court banquet clothes to him as well, mentioning that by then his measurements will change again. Time passes once more, and the boy was on his way to that so-called social club just for social masters. I never get tired of saying that name is terrible. Meanwhile, our boy was sitting in the carriage thinking that being a prince is a really exhausting position. Smiles, carriages, and even escorts. All of it is terribly suffocating. And when he looks to the side, he starts staring at the maid there, asking what that wound on her shoulder was. And she says it was due to her incompetence and something your highness should certainly regret. Right away, Idrian already knows what had happened, thinking that this body is a goldmine of bad stories. Besides, he's seen this servant many times already, but he doesn't even know her name. Asking her what her name is, and she says her name is Adelia Bayern, and it's basically a family that barely has its name on the list of nobles. Hearing that, Idrian thinks that long ago, when there was no kingdom and much less any cities, it was an era when it was natural for weak humans to be robbed and killed. There were those who put an end to the history of that miserable species, making humans become the dominant species of the continent. In total, there were 5 people who were known as the 5 Prince-Electors, and one of those heroes unbelievably had him as his sword. With that, the king of the giants was defeated, bringing a long history of exploitation to an end. And one of the people who achieved that feat was called the Lady of the Iron Sword, and her name was Agnes Bayern. The funniest part, because back then that girl cursed like crazy while fighting, and just thinking about it already made him feel uneasy. Anyway, that one over there is probably a descendant of that person wondering what the hell happened for things to end up like this. Right after that, a knight says they've finally arrived at their destination, and the kid, without wasting any time, gets out of the carriage right away, saying he wanted to talk to Adelia later. The girl doesn't understand a thing, and right after that, someone calls out to the protagonist, saying that Bernardo of the Eli family welcomes him to that place. Honestly, he has no idea how happy he is to see him. And hearing that, Idrian wonders if that is the so-called descendant of the L family. Next, the guy says he must have suffered a lot to lose so much weight, and right after that, our boy, I don't know why, just gives a smile. Bernardo asks if something was bothering him, and Idrian says he's glad he came, and that it's definitely going to be a very fun day. The guy still didn't understand a damn thing. And then the scene shifts to that damn place. Honestly, it didn't seem like a place for younger people, right? And meanwhile, the two of them were sitting on the sofa. And Bernardo thinks it's strange, because normally this guy would already be making moves on everyone. It's almost like the atmosphere has changed compared to before. And right after that, a nobleman beside them stands up, saying he heard that Your Highness won over the flower of the Iron Lion Castle, and the rumors are everywhere. Idrian just stares back at him, and the man says the girl is very beautiful in armor and would probably look pretty without it. At that, the protagonist asks whether he has a brother or sister at home. The noble says he only has a sister. And at that very instant, the protagonist punches him right in the face. Everyone is shocked by what happened. And Idrian says that's great, because if that's the case, his family's bloodline won't be cut off. The protagonist kicks him right there. And man, even I felt that one. And the kid says that from now on, his sister will be the heir of the family. He keeps going punching the guy. And unbelievably, no one does anything, and they just watch. The noble asks why he's doing this, and Idrian tells him to listen carefully to what he has to say. He doesn't care if people think he's a bastard, but he can't stand being treated like one. At that moment, the people are even more shocked, but the protagonist doesn't care at all and just keeps beating the guy. The guy gets thrown far away, and he didn't seem to be doing very well. Idrian then calls out to Bernardo, saying what he said before, that today would be a very fun day. The guy didn't understand anything, wondering why this lunatic was suddenly acting like this, who in turn orders them to call the court knights. Without wasting any time, the guy does what Idrian had asked, and then that awkward silence fills the entire hall. The MC also calls for all the women, informing them that they may leave now. Well, my friend, of course one of the nobles wasn't going to like that, and just as he was about to do something, Idrian says he only told the women to leave. Honestly, if he wants to leave, he can, but if he does, he'll be leaving as a woman. With that, of course, everyone would go quiet, right? And Idrian says they didn't even formally kneel before a prince, much less show any respect. On top of that, they laughed in his face, and to make matters worse, they insulted his knight. Anyway, he wanted to know what crime he could charge them with. Right after that, the knights appear, saying that insulting royalty is a crime against the crown itself. And as if that weren't enough, they also defied royal authority, and that is even considered treason, asking His Highness to give the order and who they should take away. And the kid, with a smile, says it'll be everyone there. So, some time passes, and Idrian was in the king's room, who says that his suspension had barely ended, and he was already causing a huge uproar. In total, 14 sons of nobles were arrested, and Idrian used every excuse he could, asking if he knows what he had really done. Idrian then asks if he's worried about the reaction. But anyway, their people their families had already abandoned, because keeping them around would only stain their names even more. Those are lost causes, so he should send letters to the families. At that, the old man falls silent, and unbelievably says that Idrian may leave. So, time passes, and Idrian says she doesn't need to be nervous because he won't hurt her. The poor thing was trembling with fear, asking if she had done something wrong, and Idrian thinks that damn prince must have done horrible things to this maid. Not even the family's direct line knew Bayern, which means the story of glory was erased and the unparalleled art was cut off. Honestly, the great prestige and lofty pride disappeared without a trace. But unbelievably, that girl has some interesting stats. One of them is the war craze trait, and the rest of the stats are also the same as that girl from the past had. Idrian thinks that unfortunately, she has no way of controlling that madness, wondering whether he could let her loose in this world. Anyway, he should at least try, right? After all, she has S-rank talent, and by some stroke of luck, she has a trait he could make use of. To be more specific, it is the spirit of a slave, a trait characterized by feeling great joy in the existence of a master whom one serves wholeheartedly. And then, without wasting any time, our boy asked the girl to swear loyalty to him. She was trying to understand what was happening, and Idrian says he was asking her to be his knight, so she has to swear right here and now. However, at that very moment, the servant kneels down, saying that this is not something she could bear, and Idrian says that she said her family is nothing special, so if that is the case, he will personally take responsibility for her. But in return, she will have to swear loyalty to him and serve him as her lord, thinking that if she cannot control her madness on her own, he will help her. The servant asks if he will really take responsibility for her family, and Idrian says that if she wants, he could bring them to the capital so she could see them whenever she wanted. Right away, the poor girl is overjoyed and, without wasting any time, immediately makes her oath of loyalty, mentioning that she will serve him and devote her life to him. The protagonist does the same, saying that from then on, she must obey his orders unconditionally. Thus, everything was settled, and Idrian was still having doubts, wondering whether he had done the right thing. But only the future will tell, my friend. Because of this, rumors spread that the first prince had gone back to acting like a scoundrel since he forced a knight's oath of loyalty through unfair means, and even summoned nobles' children to beat them and threw them in prison. On top of that, he is now making a maid who has never held a sword his knight, and it is obvious that he is trying to build a harem under the guise of direct knights. However, the brat was completely unfazed, wondering since when everyone had become so interested in him. The only thing he did was accept a direct knight, and even so, everyone has been getting on his case since early morning. The rumors are spreading way too fast, and right after that, the maid appears saying that the queen has arrived. At that, she says she thought he had turned his life around, but it seems he intends to return to his old habits. Either way, this could be interesting, because once a marriage was arranged and he settled down, her boring life would come to an end. Asking him to trust his mother, because she would definitely find him a partner this time. The woman leaves full of confidence, and Idrian thinks he does not even know what is going on, but a little later, Adelia was meeting with the protagonist, asking whether she would also possess mana. Idrian says, that is exactly right, because she will develop a very special mana, thinking that the world had completely forgotten the Sword Empress. But in truth, he had forgotten nothing, from the footprints she left behind, to the way her sword swayed in her hands. At that very moment, an aura envelops the girl's body, and the system warns that it was detecting mana inside her. Successfully, the mana enters the girl's body, and the system reports that a mana heart had finally been created. Idrian says that what he just did is a refinement method for the mana heart, and from now on, whenever she has time, she has to do it on her own. At that very moment, our boy starts to stagger, thinking that it is pathetic to end up like this, just from creating one measly mana heart. Adelia asks if he is okay, wanting to know why he would go so far for someone as humble as her, and Idrian says everything is fine, she can leave now. Changing the subject, he asks why she is staring at him like that. And right after that, the girl says she will serve him with loyalty for the rest of her life. The brat gives a smile, asking her to just remember that he is her master, and with that, he leaves thinking that honestly, he is afraid she might forget. With that, a few days pass, and the knight says that he heard that Bernardo is being held by the royal palace guard as a witness to the recent incident. Apparently no one can meet with him until the trial is held, and Idrian asks whether he will not have to appear at that trial as well, and the guy says that members of the royal family do not take the witness stand. Meanwhile, the maid kept working, and Idrian asked how she has been lately. To be more specific, he wanted to know whether the mana heart had already stabilized, and the girl says yes. And if that is the case, starting today, she will join him when he goes to train, telling her to change clothes and go straight to the training grounds. It is also about time to ditch those rags, right, partner? A few minutes later, our boy was already at the training grounds, and Valahard asks what he thinks he is doing now. The protagonist says he is just warming up, but the guy says he is referring to that girl. Our hero says it is just like he heard in the rumors, because he is basically trying to make her a knight, and his furious uncle wants to know whether knights seem that insignificant to him. Right after that, Adelia appears saying that she had done the 10 laps. Valahard still seemed upset, and Idrian, without wasting time, tells the girl to pick up that sword because today he is going to teach her some basic stances. He immediately starts by showing the movements, asking the girl to try to do the same. She then grabs the sword, and my friend, her expression changes on the spot. Valahard is surprised by what he is seeing, and Idrian cannot believe that she literally copied everything after seeing it only once. The poor girl, completely naturally, asks if her stance was correct, and Idrian thinks that if he lets his guard down, he will definitely be surpassed easily. The trait she has is submission to the strong and no respect for the weak, and he is already wary because that bastard intimidated her in the past. And if he lets her surpass him, who knows what would happen? Right, my partner. Meanwhile, Valahard had changed his opinion, saying he had no idea how much talent she had. However, the protagonist immediately tells him to stop, that asking him not to get the wrong idea. Valahard asks what someone like him could do for this child, because he is just a novice who has barely held a sword for a few months. To make it easier to understand, he cannot handle her potential. And right then, our hero falls silent, thinking that he has the kind of aura that would make that bastard tremble in fear and run away. But of course, he is not the one in this body now, right, saying that if he cannot handle her, no one else will. After all, he is someone who completely destroyed countless existences. The magic sword called Gruhan, and at that very moment the system appears, saying that part of the soul was manifesting in the body through the user's will. And then, my friend, that totally busted dragon-slaying skill appears once again, and Valahard merely watches without moving a single muscle. Hey, my friend, now this is starting to look like a turf war, and Idrian, as casually as can be, says that girl is his. Honestly, he hates it when someone takes what is his, and meanwhile, his uncle remains silent. And at that very moment, our boy goes into a trance as he realizes his sense of reality is disappearing. Then he more or less realizes what was happening, assuming that at this rate, this weak body will be consumed by the soul of the demonic sword, Gruhan. With that, a door opens, and a bunch of hands lunge at the protagonist. He still doesn't move a single muscle, and the scene returns to the present, with his uncle saying that an ordinary knight can save the lives of 10 soldiers, but an exceptional knight can save the lives of more than 100 soldiers, and that child there might even be capable of saving 1,000 soldiers, or even more. He continues the explanation there, but then the girl says that her body and soul already belong to His Highness, and she cannot follow his words. Right then, the man falls silent, and Idrian thinks it was worth the effort of bringing even her soul over, because a servile nature is destined to submit to a higher-ranked existence. Changing the subject, he asks Valahard if he doesn't have anything else to do, because from the beginning, his only goal was just to lose weight. But if he wants to keep visiting him at the palace, he shouldn't interfere in his affairs. Incredibly enough, the man accepts everything. And even after that day, his uncle keeps visiting the palace just to keep an eye on Adelia. Now he couldn't do anything since complaining and interfering were forbidden, and Idrian thinks it's pretty amusing to see that arrogant uncle acting like that. Then, at that very moment, an aura begins to surround the girl's sword. The two of them are surprised by what they were seeing, and Idrian wonders if she had already mastered that so-called sword resonance. And all delighted, he says she had done a great job, thinking that if she keeps progressing this fast, he might end up being surpassed. And right after that, his furious uncle asks if he really taught her the mana heart. Wasn't it enough for him alone to learn a trivial technique like that? And hearing that, our boy just glares at him, telling him to leave. But his uncle was already disappointed, saying there had been a much better path and potential beyond his imagination, yet he ruined absolutely everything. Then our boy was already fed up and told the knight to take his uncle away, but he says he'll leave on his own. With everything settled, Adelia asks if what she learned is a trivial technique, and of course Idrian immediately replies that that's not the case, mentioning that the people of this era have completely forgotten what a true mana heart is like. If they hadn't forgotten, they never would have discarded it like a piece of trash, but in time she will discover the true power of this ability. Then a day passes, and Idrian, surprised, says he thought he had said he would never come back. But the man says that to prove it. He will use only a single chain, and if he can pressure him even a little, he will acknowledge him. Without wasting time, our hero grabs the sword, asking what the wager was back then, which was basically granting a wish to the person who won. Valahard says that if he beats him, he will grant him anything, and if he asks him to pass on even the family technique, he will do it. However, Idrian says that isn't what he wants, but for now that is enough. And at that very moment, he charges at the old man, who easily dodges. Valahard, full of confidence, says that he has been aiming for the neck from the start, stating that it is still a very cruel sword. Our boy makes the same move, and he seemed pretty focused, right? He continues the sequence of attacks, and Valahard, with just a swing of his swords, blocks Idrian's strike, asking if that's all he has. The young man remains silent, and right after that, he steps back. Valahard asks if he has already given up, and Idrian, saying no, thinks he is annoying, but he has to admit that his uncle is very strong. He is waiting for him to release his mana just to make him suffer an even more miserable defeat, concluding that with this level of mana heart, he will certainly lose to him. Soon after, the kid changes the subject and asks if it isn't strange, mentioning that 400 years ago, countless knights with mana hearts accomplished unbelievable feats. But just because a usable technique appeared, the abilities of those great knights were treated like trash. Everyone seems to believe that the mana chain technique is a much more powerful way to manipulate mana than the mana heart. And hearing that, Valahard asks where he is going with this, and he says that his thoughts are very different. To sum it up, it wasn't the mana heart that was weak, but its master. And not all mana hearts are the same, asking his uncle if he has ever heard of a chivalric poem. And the furious man says this is a place to fight, not to stand around singing some idiotic song. And Idrian says he already knew he would say that, since he even called the mana heart a low-level technique that only mercenaries learn. Then Idrian summons his mana, reciting that so-called chant. The path a knight walks becomes an achievement, and without victories there is no pride and no power. The achievements engraved in the heart and the engraved achievements become a chivalric poem, and all of that dwells within the knight's sword. Suddenly, the system announces that the chivalric poem has been created, and the kid thinks that he's achieved at least one small accomplishment he built up over the last 6 months. And that right there is the true power of the mana heart. The kid was glowing all over, and Valahard says that no matter what he does, the result will be the same. As long as he possesses a mana heart, he will never be able to defeat the mana current. And Idrian, not caring about anything else, charges at his uncle, who says that elven mana has the property of reversing the flow of mana in the heart. Our boy was having some kind of difficulty, while his uncle was completely at ease, saying that he's a master at stubbornly enduring like an idiot. But our boy gives a smile, thinking that to obtain this poem, he dueled more than 100 times, enduring the elves' mana pressure more than 1,000 times. This is a power forged specifically to face a knight of the currents. And at that very moment, an explosion happens. And that right there is the true power of the duel poem. Now they could finally fight for real. And without wasting any time, the two cross swords, and Idrian goes on the offensive. He was much more confident now, wondering how long his uncle would be able to hold out. At that moment, he finally coats his sword with aura, counterattacking our boy. He takes a step back, and his uncle was trying to understand how that was possible. Adrian says he had already warned him before that not all mana hearts are the same, but the guy doesn't want to hear any of it, saying that he's very arrogant. Right after that, he charges at the kid, hurling him against the wall, saying that playtime is over, and the fact that he resisted this long is already impressive enough. He definitely has his recognition, and as Adrian falls to the ground, he thinks that, as expected, a common grade chivalric poem would not be enough. He then pulls himself together, saying that 400 years ago the knights made a fatal mistake. They left no enemies for their descendants. And at first, everything must have been passed down intact, the sword techniques and the method of refining the heart. There were also the glorious chivalric poems, but time wore down those brilliant feats until they eventually simply fell into oblivion. Songs about dragons never seen and giant kings no one had ever heard of. In the end, they must have become nothing more than empty myths. Of course, new chivalric poems could have been created, but they could never be capable of surpassing those of the heroes. And back in the present, the protagonist says that a technique like mana current will never reach transcendence. At that, the guy says that for a while now he hasn't understood anything he's been saying. And Adrian thinks that Valohard is a foolish and arrogant knight, mentioning that it's already time for them to realize exactly how much they have lost. After all, if he doesn't know, he'll make sure to show him the true power of a mana heart user. He recites another one of those blessed chants, and the system warns that his current skill does not support the grade of this poem. In the end, he managed only less than a quarter of the poem's phrase, which was cutting the dragon's scales. But my friend, that was already enough for the kid to charge at his uncle, who, unbelievably, manages to block the attack. And now he was the one having some kind of difficulty thinking that if this keeps up, he'll end up being consumed. At that very moment, an explosion happens, and the protagonist is thrown far away. In the middle of the smoke, his uncle was still standing, and the kid just watches, asking if he didn't say he would use only one ring, thinking that even after he used all 4 rings he had, he still couldn't stop his sword from being split in half. Our boy then gets back up, and Valohard thinks that it should be an absolute truth that heart mana is inferior to current mana, but now that wasn't the case. My friend Anidrian says that Valohard had been defeated. With that, time passes, and our boy seemed to be suffering from something. The kid kept tossing and turning in bed, saying that all of this is because of the chivalric poem. This is the price for forcing the power of the chivalric poem beyond its limit. After all, the Dragon Slayer's poem is myth grade. Thanks to that, his heart is in pieces, but his sacrifice was worth it. It was the first chivalric poem he made on his own, and he will keep standing firm before even greater waves. At that very moment, Adelia appears at the place happy that the kid finally woke up, saying that there was a huge commotion after he passed out, and she had never seen his mother so nervous. Besides that, Valohard asked her to let him know when the protagonist woke up, but the guy says not to tell him yet because he wants to rest a little. He was really feeling the consequences of using the poem, thinking that if he didn't recover the spirit that was damaged by the forced use of the chivalric poem, he would pay a terrible price. The memories of the past and reality will become a chaotic tangle until, at some point, the boundary of reality collapses completely. Thus, the person ends up going mad, endlessly reliving moments of glory in a distorted world, and to think that he finally became human only to be imprisoned once again by the memories of a sword. With that, time passes, and Adrian says that Agnes Bayern was a formidable swordswoman, and since she is a direct descendant, she may inherit a chivalric poem that he left behind. The girl is surprised to have such an incredible ancestor, and Adrian says that to possess a rank worthy of that poem, she will have to evolve much further. Having said that, he asks what she intends to do after mastering the art of the sword. Hearing that, the girl falls silent, and she did not seem to have the slightest idea of what she wanted. Adrian says that if she cannot think of it now, she can tell him later, and then the girl says that she will continue being his sword. At that moment, Adrian is surprised, thinking that some poems begin with the sound of a trumpet, while others begin with the first step into war. But there are chivalric poems whose stories begin with a sincere oath. At that very moment, the system announces that Adelia was offering a poem of submission, and our boy wonders if that was her chivalric poem. Besides that, sometimes a poem like this could influence others, and the system announces that a new chivalric poem has been created. Look at the size of that tree, my friend. That one is common class, and Adrian says that the poem of submission is a hymn dedicated to a master and a vow of loyalty that binds souls, even though it has servile characteristics. Honestly, there was no way to expect that a descendant of the Sword Queen would have a poem of submission, so he received some unexpected help, concluding that as long as he continues to be the target of that poem, Adelia's growth will also bring him some benefits. Our boy soon thanks her, thinking that he still has no idea how those benefits will manifest. And so a few days pass, and our boy did not seem very happy. His 2 knights simply remain silent, and his mother asks if he is feeling well, and he immediately says yes, thinking that it is easy easier to deal with someone who hates this body, but it is much more uncomfortable to have around someone who liked the original owner. Soon after, his mother asks if he holds a grudge against his uncle, saying that he did not mean to hurt him, so even if he feels some resentment, he should let it go. Adrian says he holds no grudge, and his mother nervously says that he was very rude and complained about every little detail, so saying he holds no grudge can only be a lie. But the boy casually says that he really feels nothing, thinking that he had already gotten back at him that day. And since all his pride and convictions were denied, it must be hard for him to endure everything. To sum it up, what he planted in his uncle that day was a heart demon. If he endures it, he will make an even greater leap, but honestly, he does not care what happens after that. Soon after, his mother says that his uncle lived closer to the sword than other people did, and that is why he must have been very rough. Even so, he must have a very good impression of the protagonist, because he went so far as to personally persuade his majesty. It was thanks to him that his confinement was lifted earlier than expected. But since the unforeseen incident happened as soon as his confinement ended, his uncle's position must have become very difficult. Hearing all that, Adrian thinks that is why he had acted in such an unpleasant way before. But in any case, he wants to know why that man would do all this for him. A little later, an old man appears with a pile of books, and Adrian says that he hates this from the bottom of his soul. At that very moment, the boy starts throwing a fit, asking why he has to study. And the old man says that a person who does not seek knowledge is no different from an animal. Furious, Adrian asks if he is calling him an animal, and the man says that your highness has only just begun his studies and therefore still cannot be classified as such. But he confidently says that he already knows everything he needs to do and has already said there is no need to learn anything else. Hearing that, the old man says that if that is the case, then they will do the following, asking to discuss a few topics. And if your highness's abilities are everything he claims, he will not come back to bother him anymore. Thus, Adrian accepts, and a little later, he says that this is why you must always be careful with those at your rear, because by nature, if you give people too much freedom, they end up walking all over you. I do not understand anything anymore. But the old man says that everything is fine, and handing him a book says it will be interesting for the boy. The two continue that boring study session, and so time passes. With everything done, the old man says they will continue their conversation tomorrow, and incredibly enough, Adrian seemed to have liked it. And then a few minutes later, he realizes what he was doing, thinking that it ended up being a normal lesson. Honestly, that old man is smart as hell. And meanwhile, the old gentleman was surprised, thinking that the prince is very different from what the rumors say. And so a day passes, and our boy was sprawled out on the bed, saying that he is very bored, wondering if he has been too diligent lately because he has nothing to do since he is not training, right? At that very moment, Adelia appears saying that Lord Valahard is here, and the boy is happy to finally have some visitor, asking her to let him in, thinking that a few days had passed since their last duel, so it was about time he showed up, right? But when he looks at the guy, it looks like he got hit by a truck, and he definitely hasn't gotten over the heart demon that had been planted in him at all. The guy stays silent, and right after that, unbelievably, apologizes to the protagonist. He had broken the promise he made to himself, and because of that, caused him a serious injury, and even if he apologized 1,000 times, nothing would justify what he did. But the kid thinks the reason he needed treatment wasn't his uncle's aura blade, but because he forced himself to use the dragon-slaying poem. And then, right away, he remembers what his mother had said, because since he caused trouble, his uncle's situation must have become very complicated. Meanwhile, his uncle was still feeling awful, asking what he would want. If he wanted, he could take his arm, and even his eye, and obviously the kid wouldn't want that, asking why he would wish for something like that, thinking that before, he would have been at the level of a sword master. But now he's stuck because of a stupid heart demon. So the kid says he'll be generous, saying that he'll declare his first wish because he wanted him to let him go out for a while. Valahard says that since his house arrest is over, he can go out whenever he wants. But Adrian says he's not talking about a day trip, and honestly wants to go somewhere else, farther away, and more specifically outside the capital. The guy says it'll take some time to arrange everything, and since there'll be a banquet soon, they can't go anywhere too far away. But Adrian doesn't want to hear any of that, saying it's not a problem. With everything settled, the old man says he'll get in touch as soon as the schedule is set. Then the guy leaves the room, and Adrian asks why the knight is looking at him like that. Who says it's a little unexpected because he thought your highness would demand something much more irrational. After all, the count broke his promise, and in many ways this is a rare opportunity. However, Adrian says that seeing that stubborn man act like that made him feel a little sorry for him. Hearing that, the knight starts laughing, and Adrian says he's been getting way too comfortable lately. At that very moment, Adelia appears saying that the letter he had been waiting for had finally arrived. It had been written by Arwen, who says that she recently achieved a small accomplishment, and believes she might be able to visit him soon, hoping he would stay safe until that blessed moment. The kid looks at the message happily, saying it came at a good time, and about 5 days later, his uncle sent confirmation, and 2 more days passed until the day of departure. In total, a week passed, and the protagonist, in a carriage, asks which territory territory he said they would be passing through. The guy keeps up his usual bad mood, saying he can't stay quiet, and since he's going to explain it, he could at least stay seated in the carriage. Basically, the place they're going is Count Ellen's territory. It's the main weapons production center for the palace, and there's an iron mine there to supply high-quality raw material, and a blacksmith's guild to refine it. It's no exaggeration to say that more than half of the royal family's weapons come from that blessed clan. And surprised, Idrian thinks that now that his level has risen a lot, it's long past time to find a sword to call his own. Originally, he could just take a decent sword from the royal arsenal, but unfortunately, since life isn't easy, they can't hand him any weapon. After all, they hadn't forgotten what the kid had done in the past, my friend. Considering this guy's track record, it's only natural, but in any case, that means if he wants a real weapon, he'll have to get it outside the palace. Besides, Valahard may not seem like it, but he's surprisingly considerate. Anyway, that 20-day journey was about to begin. The trip involves a brief stop in Count Ellen's territory, 3 days from the royal capital, and visiting Iron Lion Castle again, 2 days away. And then they'll return to the royal capital after recovering from the fatigue of the journey. Right now, the protagonist has been sitting in that carriage for 3 whole days without moving a single muscle, and unfortunately, the person sitting in front of him is no fun at all. The kid was really very disappointed, wondering if he should check his mana heart while he's there. His heart is empty as a side effect of using the dragon poem, but it's already time to start filling it again. His senses were still sharp because he could feel everything from the light breeze passing by to the voices of the knights outside. And by gathering the fragments of mana hidden among them, he could fill his mana heart once again. Unbelievably, he manages to do it. But something is different because his mana heart is much bigger, and the system warns that he attempted an impossible miracle and glimpsed a fragment of that immense will. Idrian thinks that this is the result of forcing the use of the dragon poem, and at that very moment, the system announces that he has reached the level of sword specialist. His connection to the source improved a little, and some restrictions on his recovered authorities were lifted. As a result, the authority of the third eye was significantly enhanced, and Idrian, without wasting any time, starts looking at his body, realizing that he has evolved much more. The scene then shifts to Count Ellen's territory, and man, just look at the size of that mansion. Right after that, someone says they can't express the honor of meeting them like this. Introducing himself, he says his name is Edgar of the Ellen family, and the other man beside him is named Torrance. Idrian thanks them for their hospitality, and the man in the red uniform says they must be exhausted from the long journey, asking them to let him show them to their room. With that, the boy walks through the mansion, thinking that they said this was a place that produced weaponry, and indeed the entire mansion is filled with all kinds of weapons. But they are only low-quality items that look flashy, yet useless in real combat. Apparently, it's going to be difficult to find what he's looking for there. Changing the subject, he asks if they said the blacksmith's guild is within the territory. If that's the case, he would like to take a look at that place. And a few minutes later, the butler says that blacksmiths are rude and stubborn by nature. And when work is in full swing, they often ignore even the Lord, even if he comes to visit. So even if he finds their behavior offensive, he should show mercy, considering that it is the spirit of the artisan. Looking at the forge, the boy is surprised, and the man says that the heat of the forge is intense, asking him to let them know if it becomes too difficult to bear. The protagonist continues to watch in silence, thinking that the flames roar and the blacksmiths keep hammering the iron. And amid all that, there is one particularly clear sound. The boy seems to recognize all of this, thinking that this is probably it. After all, the first memory he can recall is that we forget he was once a sword, right? Shortly after, Adelia says that His Highness was sweating too much. However, he turns his face away, continuing to watch the blacksmith forging. Soon after, all the blacksmiths introduce themselves, saying they greet the Grand Prince. The butler says that this is the one in charge of the blacksmith's guild, and meanwhile, one of the men kept forging. The pissed-off guy asks what he is doing, ordering him to stop immediately and greet the prince. Hearing that, Idrian simply tells the man to be quiet, and looking around at those young men, he thinks it seems they were dragged there against their own will. Then he says the iron is cooling, and if they intend to let the forge fire die out, they should just keep standing there like that. Without wasting time, Gerald starts forging again, and Idrian remains silent. The guy just can't stop watching that blasted blacksmith. And man, that guy really is incredible. The protagonist saw something in that blasted young man, wondering what exactly that feeling was. A little later, the butler says that, for some reason, that man has been repeating the process of forging and melting swords for 6 months. The boy asks if they could all have been failures, but the young man does not seem to know about that. Since every sword he makes is a masterpiece, he is recognized as the master blacksmith. To him, the swords that blacksmith had forged seemed flawless, and it was a mystery why he melted every one of them. On top of that, for a month now, he has barely slept and has been basically completely focused on his work. And since he is no longer young, they were very worried about his condition. And hearing that, the only thing Idrian can think is that that man is a true artisan. Several days passed after that, and every morning the prince arrived early at the forge and only left late at night. During that time, the old man simply continued with his daily work, and our boy merely limited himself to watching in silence. Contrary to the tension caused by the rumors that the first prince would come, there was no incident, which was quite surprising to them. But then, at last, the day of the prince's departure arrived. Even so, the boy kept watching the blacksmith forging without stopping. Then the protagonist says he had hoped to see it finished before leaving, but unfortunately, that does not seem to be the case. Our hero seems genuinely very regretful, saying that since he is leaving, they said there will be a farewell party tonight, and because of that, he will have to leave at dawn. And so, time passes, and day finally breaks. Soon after, that butler appears, saying that it seems the master had finished his sword. Without wasting time, the boy heads toward the artisan who was holding the sword while wiping its blade. That weapon is truly worthy of being called a masterpiece. And then the old man kneels before the prince, saying that he dedicates that sword to the boy. Everyone is surprised by that, and Idrian thinks that it only needs to be heated like the sun roaring on the horizon and cooled until its hue matches the king's purple robes. If that is done, a sword polished like the sun and akin to a king would be born as ours. I'm not understanding anything anymore. Idrian continues to look at the sword, asking if it has a name. The blacksmith says he was thinking of calling it Twilight, wanting to know whether it would be the twilight of dawn or of dusk. To him, it should be Twilight. But to your majesty, it will surely be dawn. And hearing that, Idrian says he speaks very well for someone his age, but meanwhile, the man did not seem very well, and falling to the ground, he says it is a relief to have finished the sword. Without wasting time, our boy helps the blacksmith, saying that they will have to spend the night there one more time. With that, time passes, and Idrian was taking care of the blacksmith, who says that the moment your majesty stopped behind him that day, the sword took shape as if it were fate. The sword chose its own day to be born, and Idrian asks if that is how he sees it. And moving closer to the man, he tells him something that unfortunately we do not know. He probably said that he was actually a sword in the past, right? And hearing that, the old man says he could probably even be God. But anyway, now he understands everything, asking to let him see that sword for a moment. And taking it, he wishes that this sword would become as magnificent as its wielder. And right after that, the protagonist, holding the old man's hand, says that it definitely will. And then, my friend the old man sadly passed away, but at least he went with honor, having finished his sword, right? A short while later, the blessed thing had already been wrapped up, and the butler says that he cannot measure the value of a sword forged with the weapon itself, but he believes it may not be suitable for your highness's use. By coincidence, there was another magic sword he had intended to offer him, asking him to accept the gift. Idrian, in turn, is surprised, saying that it's a good weapon, thinking that even if it wasn't high grade, it's an excellent mid-grade sword. However, he says that a sword forged by a renowned master who poured his own soul into it is already a magnificent gift. Besides, he had already intended to offer a magic sword. And hearing that, the butler immediately realizes the mess he got himself into. But he had no choice but to accept it all, thinking that he had tried to recover the master's sword using that other one as bait, but unfortunately ended up giving away both, right? The guy really messed up. And a little while later, everyone was already getting organized to return to the royal city. Our boy just watches everything in silence. Soon after, Valohard says that he should get ready, because they plan to ride fast today to reach the Iron Lion Castle by tonight. However, our boy casually says that he doesn't know how to ride a horse. Everyone is surprised by that, but there's no way the kid would know. After all, he used to be a sword, right? With that, time passes, and the protagonists seem to have had some kind of problems, but fortunately, everything worked out. Even though it took twice as long as planned, they reached their destination in about a full day. That there was the so-called Iron Lion Castle, and right after that, a bunch of soldiers appear. The guy over there says that York of the Willow family greets the honorable first prince. Looking at that situation, Idrian seemed to have noticed something. And man, those soldiers didn't seem very happy. Obviously, there was a reason for that, right? And then, the protagonist, starting to provoke them, calls out to Arwen. The girl then greets him back, saying that she had been counting the days, eager for the moment of seeing him again. And right then, my friend, everyone starts boiling with hatred, wanting to go after the protagonist. And, incredibly enough, the same thing happens with Adelia. At that, Idrian, seeing what was happening, places a hand on the girl's shoulder. She seemed to have returned to normal. Anyway, it was good to awaken her servile nature in advance. Soon after, Idrian calls out to Arwen, asking her to follow him, because there are many things they need to talk about, thinking it would be even better if those guys came with them too. A little later, the protagonist was holding a sword, saying that he wanted to see the Iron Lion's swordsmanship because they say it's the best in the kingdom, and if that's the case, he wanted to know who would want to fight him. The soldiers start arguing there, and Idrian just watches, saying that if his position is a burden to them, he guarantees in the name of Leonberger that no one will be held responsible for the result of the duel, asking if still no one will step forward, and who would have thought that the renowned Iron Lions would be so cowardly. Hearing that, a soldier then accepts the duel, and that redhead over there is called Dale. He is far from being worthy of representing the Iron Lion's swordsmanship, but if permitted, he would dare to stand before your highness. However, Idrian says there is nothing to worry about since he was the one who made the invitation, and without wasting time, the soldier soldier charges at him, and the kid, completely calm, blocks the blow. The redhead was having some kind of difficulty, and in that same instant, with the greatest ease, he is thrown far away. Man, the mana heart really is ridiculously overpowered, and Idrian, without wasting time, immediately tells the next one to come forward. That other guy there also tries to confront our boy, but unfortunately, he meets the same fate as the other soldier. And then time passes, and the kid keeps beating down every soldier who comes before him. He was already starting to get bored, and a short while later, man, all the soldiers were sprawled on the ground. Idrian thinks that he is already starting to lose patience and wants to fight against the official members. Next, the boy calls out to Arwen, saying that when he returns to the capital, she will accompany him. The girl stays silent, but even so, she accepts the boy's order. Soon after, another soldier appears, saying that he heard Idrian likes making bets, and if that's the case, he wanted to make one with him to liven things up. But right then, my friend, Idrian realizes what was happening and quickly refuses the bet, mentioning that Arwen is not a tournament prize. If that's the case, they should bet something else instead. And taking up his new sword, he says that if he wins, he will personally hand over this sword to him. Everyone is surprised by what the protagonist had said, and when the girl was about to interfere, Idrian says that she is far more valuable than that sword, thinking that the value of a swordmaster cannot be compared to a weapon like that. Next, the short-haired guy accepts the bet, saying his name is Dunran of the Fahrenheit family, and that he is about to reach the triple current. Idrian says that in the end, that means he's a double current. And the guy, furious, says that this was the 17th sword made by the craftsman known as the Swordmaster. If he wins, this sword will belong to your majesty. And hearing that, Idrian says it's a coincidence. And drawing his weapon, he says that, as it happens, he also has a sword he received from that master. This is the master's 100th work, but the guy says he's never heard any rumors that he made a sword like that. However, Idrian says that this work was only completed a few days ago, and the soldier, summoning his mana current, says that although your highness is walking the wrong path of the sword, he can see relentless effort in every one of your steps, and out of respect for that, he will do his best in this fight. After that, Idrian says he's just talking nonsense, but it makes no difference, since this was never a place he could have called his from the start, declaring that the respect directed toward him only needs to come from his own people. And summoning his mana heart, he asks Adelia to watch closely, because that path is the one she must walk from now on. And hearing that the girl starts shining again, saying she swears she will do as your highness wishes. A little later, the scene shifts to another place, and Valohard asks how many times they have already come to the Iron Lion Castle, and the guy beside him says 4 in total. The 4th prince has no interest in the throne, so he certainly wouldn't go there. The 3rd and 5th princes showed up when the 1st prince was under house arrest, and the 2nd prince also stopped by not long ago. However, no matter how bad his reputation was, it was undeniable that the 1st prince would be the kingdom's rightful heir. But for things to have reached this point, his responsibility is also enormous. If he, the commander of the 3rd Legion, had supported the 1st prince even a little, he wouldn't be so isolated. Asking why he is acting like his protector now, and the man thinks there is no lie in those words, since he did in fact turn his back on his nephew once. He was someone who had a greater chance of becoming a tyrant than an incompetent ruler. There was even a day when he reprimanded him for being drunk on an evil elixir, and the brat, unbelievably, came at him with a sword. Man, there's no way. This 1st prince was an idiot. Basically, a hopeless scoundrel, and when he returned to the north, disappointed, his nephew sent him poisoned wine. He even had the audacity to call it a gift. And while he burned away the cheap poison of dubious origin with mana, he also burned away what little affection he still had left for that boy. But that scoundrel he thought would never change ended up doing the opposite all of a sudden. He was enduring harsh training and has been growing day by day. Then the man asks if it wasn't Valohard himself who had personally said that the 1st prince should never become king. But my friend, his uncle had already changed his mind, thinking that the child he is now has nothing to do with who he was in the past, asking him to give the young man a chance so that he could at least start from the same line as the other princes. Man, Valohard even starts begging, and of course the guy didn't know what to say, mentioning that he doesn't know whether it was he who changed or the 1st prince. At that very moment, a soldier opens the door, and man, I can already tell this won't be good. A little later, the two were walking through the castle, and the guy beside him says there's no reason for so much concern because his soldiers know their own limits, so nothing will happen. No matter how intense the duel is, he would never let a member of the royal family be knocked unconscious. But the guy says that right now, it's not the prince he should be worried about, but his knight. And there you go, my friend. It happened just like he said. Out of nowhere, the guy is sent flying. The man was completely wrecked on the ground, and everyone was surprised that his highness had won once again. The guy beside him couldn't understand what was happening, and Valohard says he had already said it before. The protagonist doesn't stop for even a single second, and raising his sword, he tells the next one to step up. Next, a flashback appears with the protagonist still fighting the short-haired guy, thinking that his current duel poem is not enough, and of course he couldn't use the Dragon Slayer's one against an ordinary knight. At that, the young man activates his mana heart, thinking that his body no longer feels like his own. And unbelievably, that same feeling from back then was happening again. The kid was basically entering a state of deeper concentration, and at that very moment, their swords clash, and returning to the present, the guy was literally sent flying. Thus, time passes once again, and Idrian kept defeating every soldier who appeared in front of him. A little later, it was almost nightfall, and the boy had taken down a large part of the knights. He begins to recite a duel poem, and the system notifies him that he managed to add a new verse to it. It had evolved from a poem of mourning into a poem of battle. At that very moment, the boy was about to faint, but one of the knights helps him, saying that he wished to pay his respects to the victory won by your highness. All the knights salute the protagonist who, not understanding anything, thinks that just a moment ago everyone was about to tear him apart. Meanwhile, Valahard and the other guy were watching everything from afar, and the man says that they are simple people by nature, mentioning that nothing excites them anymore except the sword and victory. Right after that, Valahard says that judging by his face, he must have thought he would earn the resentment of those soldiers. However, an honest defeat is worth more than a dirty victory. Either way, winning or losing does not matter. And hearing that, Idrian thinks that he had believed everything he knew had been forgotten along with Mana's heart. But it seems that at least one single thing had not changed. Regardless of defeat or victory, the spirit of the knight still remains in. Thus, some time passes, and Idrian seemed to already be returning to his kingdom, saying that he hoped they would meet again on another occasion. With everything settled, the boy was just about to get into the carriage, but then he calls for the count, asking them to keep secret what happened during his stay, and Willowden asks whether making it public would not be advantageous for his highness. However, he says that this case will be different after all. He wanted to play a prank on a certain someone. A short time later, the soldiers were going to rest, and Carl says that he will scout the surroundings. Meanwhile, Arwen was silently watching our boy. She did not seem very happy, and Idrian thinks that she will adapt soon enough too. Anyway, he should get some rest too, right? And when he enters the tent, Adelia was inside as well. The kid still had not fully processed it, thinking that he had clearly recruited an S-rank genius, yet she was still doing maid work. But the poor guy just wants to rest now, and soon after Adelia asks if there is anything bothering him. However, he says that everything is fine, thinking that the Iron Lion Knights were very different from what he had thought. When he used the appraisal skill, the sword talent of most of the knights did not go beyond rank B. But in the past, they would barely have reached the average level. And even after a lifetime of harsh training, they were commoners who would have died in vain. However, the people of today had reached a level equivalent to that of a sword expert in only 20 or 30 years. In short, the abilities of superhumans had fallen drastically, while those of commoners had made an exponential leap. It is probably because of the mana current, and his uncle is someone who in the past might even have reached transcendence, which is why he was so displeased to see him wasting that potential. However, this era is one in which there is not even the opportunity to accomplish feats beyond an extraordinary degree. In the end, it was entirely the fault of the times, and he has to admit that he does not know this era well. For that reason, he will have to reevaluate everything from the beginning, and right after that Valahard appears, saying that that is the right attitude. It is not too late yet, and if he works hard, from now on, he will be able to achieve his dream. He has already won over the Iron Lions, mentioning that if it were other princes, they would not be able to get along with them so naturally, stating that Idrian made a very wise decision. What is this? This guy is being way too nice. This is weird. The protagonist did not understand anything, wondering what had happened to his uncle. He even asks if he had gone crazy. However, his uncle asks whether he does not remember the conditions of the bet he had made with him. Basically, it was about defeating a dual current knight, and he will do as promised, saying that Valahard, commander of the 3rd Legion, will officially support the Prince of the Kingdom. Hearing that, our boy is instantly stunned, wanting to know when exactly he had said that he wanted to be king. And so time passed, and my friend, your uncle's declaration hit the kingdom like a bomb. Everyone was congratulating the kid, and in the middle of all that chaos, our hero was there. He says that the place is a mess, asking them to send everyone away. However, Carl says that they came by royal order, so they will not leave even if he orders them to. If that is the case, Idrian asks them to at least get them out of his sight. And a little later, our boy was resting for a bit, but that lasted only a short time, and at that very moment, his brother appears, saying that he acted behind his back, because after doing that, he even secretly learned swordsmanship from Count Valahard. But my friend, he made a terrible mistake, and that is why he is going to make him pay dearly for making a fool of him. However, the protagonist barely knew how to respond to that. After all, he had never wanted anything to do with the throne, right? At that very moment, a flashback appears, with Idrian saying that he will play along with this for now, but he should make it clear that he is not interested in anything involving the throne. Questioning why he started this without even consulting him, and hearing that, Valahard asks if he is worried about him. After all, he is basically the shield that protects the kingdom from the monsters of the northern mountains. However, as long as the royal family and the nobles do not forget the harshness of winter, the house will be fine. In any case, it was only a matter of time, and this was going to happen sooner or later. Asking if he truly doesn't know the fate of a firstborn son who doesn't inherit the throne, and that the situation won't change just because he keeps hiding. If he needs time to accept reality, he'll be given as much as necessary, but he has to keep in mind that the legitimacy of the eldest son won't disappear unless he dies. After that whole conversation, his uncle leaves the room, and Idrian says that no matter how much time he's given, he won't change his mind. After all, what he really needs to regain is his authority and his power, which had reached transcendence. So it's not because he wants something like the right of succession, or at least that's what he thought, right? And in the middle of that party, our boy enters the place, and right away you can tell the atmosphere wasn't very good. The spotlight was on the protagonist, and everyone stares at him, and there was even a hooded figure watching him. And that's how that banquet began. Man, I've got a bad feeling something awful is going to happen there. Idrian goes down the stairs and looking around, wonders if these are really the kingdom's nobles. The funniest part is that they all have the serpent heart trait, which is a mark of those who steal from and trample on other people's lives without hesitation. The only ones really worth watching are that little group up front, and when the MC goes to greet Taylor, he says they should have talked beforehand, thinking that even if he doesn't have great talent, at least he isn't corrupt. Either way, that's already enough, and starting today, they'll serve as vessels for planting the seeds. Man, what kind of story is this? At that very moment, a soldier appears saying that Ambassador Couillon de Bourgogne-Montpellier is arriving. Damn, what a ridiculously hard name. Right away, everyone bows to the old man, who was definitely a high-ranking noble. Then the man says it's been quite a long time, and after hearing that name, the boy seems surprised. At the same time, a flashback appears with Idrian thinking that this is the man they fought for a long period of time 400 years ago, a name that left countless scars on this country, and even so, he dared to show up before him. At that very moment, a noble suddenly trips, and man, he completely soaked the MC. The guy then apologizes, and Idrian, just staring at the noble, says that it's fine. Changing the subject, he asks Carls who that man was, who says that he is Marcus Bielefeld. Then Idrian says it seems not everyone is completely rotten, and thanks to that his head cooled down a little. A few minutes later, the MC was washing his face, and then his uncle appears looking at his face, saying that Marquis Bielefeld commented that he looked like he was about to cause trouble. Apparently, he wasn't talking nonsense, and man, the MC is almost losing it. His uncle asks what he was planning to do, and he replies that he's not that stupid, but there was one thing he couldn't understand. The wicked house of Bourgogne flaunts its power right in the heart of the kingdom, and the nobles revere them more than royalty itself. There was too much tension to call it peace, and far too one-sided a relationship to call it an alliance, asking how the hell the country got to this point. His uncle says there isn't any particularly special story mentioning that in the past, as the kingdom resisted many invasions from the empire, the knights rose up to repel the enemy. However, as time passed, the empire kept growing, and the gap between them only widened. And faced with an empire that had become a superpower, the kingdom ended up with no choice but to kneel. Hearing that, Idrian immediately thinks it was probably because of that. Despite being a small country located at the edge of the continent, the kingdom had something that allowed it to stand against that powerful empire. Since the nation's founding, achievements had piled up, and even myths, and they must not forget the poem of the knights. However, all of that was lost, and right after that, the protagonist says he changed his mind, declaring that now he wants to become a king. Valahard is surprised, and Idrian thinks he may regret it, but it's something he needs to do. After all, he had built nearly half of this country with his own hands. A short while later, our hero returns to the banquet and looking around the nobles, seemed to be worried about something. Idrian thinks this etiquette is so sloppy it wouldn't even come close to the treatment given to a foreign noble, thinking that in the past, when his friend stood before his people, no one imagined he would become king. After all, he was nothing more than a country boy from a remote village, and even so, the guy stepped forward before the people. All of it exactly the way he is doing now. The boy then begins to recite the poem of the knights before everyone thinking that compared to the Dragon Slayer's poem, this one is bearable. But even so, there is no better chant than this for the situation right now. Damn. Out of nowhere, a crown and cape appeared on the kid. At that very moment, everyone starts staring at our boy, and without wasting time, they finally bow. Now that's much better. Idrian says they can raise their heads now, but at that same moment, the boy feels a different kind of energy. And looking to the side, he sees that hooded girl. She takes off the hood, and man, the girl is an elf who says she was surprised that someone still remembered the chivalric poems. With that, Idrian seems to recognize this woman, wondering how that lunatic was there. The most beautiful creation shaped by the gods, and a kind race that does not waste even the smallest life. The gardeners of the forest who live at least 300 years and can reach up to 1,000. That is how humans see elves. But in reality, they are a cruel people who use beauty as bait to lead their opponents to ruin. The high elves, who are born already at hero level, are even more dangerous among them. And the one standing before you is not just an ordinary high elf, but a being who has lived for nearly 1,000 years, an ancient high elf. Her name is Sigrun, and she is a member of the expedition that slew the furious dragon 400 years ago. In the past, this girl was obsessed with possessing the protagonist once her master was killed, wondering whether she had, by any chance, recognized him. Right after that, the girl asks if they haven't met before because he looks kind of familiar, and Idrian, without wasting time, just shakes his head, saying that it's his first time seeing an elf. The girl keeps staring at our hero, who thinks that Sigrun was already one of the most powerful creatures of her time during the Sword Era 400 years ago. He doesn't even want to imagine what kind of monster she has become now. And right after that, she says that they say humans react to elves in two ways when seeing them for the first time. Most mortals let themselves be seduced, but there are those who have reached a level of mastery that makes them stay on guard. But, from what she can see, Your Highness still doesn't seem to have reached that level. Then Idrian says he just has different aesthetic tastes. So of course, the girl, hearing that, was going to get nervous, right? And putting her hood back on, she says it was a pleasure to meet him, even if only for a short time. She finally leaves, and then Idrian thinks that he had survived, at least for now. A short while later, a whole bunch of girls were showing up, for the protagonist to choose from, and man, there's even a child there. No one could take that mess anymore. And his mother says that a future princess must be wise, virtuous, and a whole lot of other things. I couldn't take that old woman talking anymore either. And right after that, a soldier says that the delegation of elves has requested an audience. At that very moment, that hooded girl from before appears, saying that Sigrun of the Mistletoe tribe greets our beautiful Queen Margarita. I only just found out this woman's name now. She says it has been a very long time since the elves visited the kingdom, and it is truly surprising. At that, Sigrun says that it seems your majesty is looking for a bride for the prince, asking if that is true. And removing her hood, she announces that she is a high elf. And in human terms, one could say that she belongs to an ancient noble lineage. And incredibly enough, her age is not so different from yours, your highness. Wow, I can already see what's going to happen, man. She heard that elves, who preserve their beauty for so long, are ideal partners for humans. See, man, what did I tell you? And in fact, from the very moment she saw the prince, she felt that the fate of the two of them had aligned. This is going way too far. Right away, our boy is surprised, thinking that elves never lie when they speak of fate, wondering if that was sincere. Margarita just listens to that, surprised, and then everyone in the hall starts discussing it, wanting to know if it was true. So, Idrian, without wasting time, takes the girl by the hand, saying that they must speak alone quickly, and a few minutes later, Idrian calls out to her, asking her to state her true objective, and she says it was only to strengthen the ties between her tribe and the kingdom. However, Idrian says he is going to ask the high elf, Sigrun, one more time. The executioner who for centuries has carried the karma of her race's slaughter and the sword of the Mistletoe tribe, asking whether her objective there is investigation or even execution. At that very moment, the girl's expression changes, asking how he knows so much about her, and Idrian, watching in silence, thinks that she is a monster whose strength, in his current state, he cannot even begin to measure. And if she sensed a destiny in him, that means she possesses a level high enough to vaguely glimpse the past engraved on his soul. Right after that, the girl says that he knows she is an executioner, and still does not understand how stupid it is to remain silent before her. However, the boy warns that he understands very well, because he also knows that talking too much in front of an executioner is equally idiotic. In any case, she must stop this mess, asking her not to interfere in his destiny, thinking that at this moment she must only feel curiosity toward him. And if this continues, the insignificant destiny of a human will be wasted in the hands of a lunatic elf. If that is the case, he has to provoke greater interest, and then Sigrun asks who he really is. He says that at this moment he is only a pathetic prince who was abandoned even by his own father, and if she is curious about anything, she only has to wait and see. Hearing that, the girl is surprised, saying that she knew there was something strange. After all, they would not send her on such an idiotic mission, but now she understands that all of that was because of him. And the poor protagonist, just wanting to leave, thinks that she is still a very disturbing woman. A short while later, the scene returns to the king's hall, and man, the two of them were holding hands there. They stand before the queen, and Idrian says he has something to declare, stating that he will accept the engagement with the girl. Man, this is going from 0 to 100 way too fast. Thinking that he never imagined the day would come when he would say that girl's name with such familiarity. It is far too important a matter for them to decide so quickly, so he will just observe the situation for now, thinking that for the queen, it will be a long period of time for them to consider. While for Sigrun, it will be just the time during which he will be maturing, and for him, it will be the necessary time to gain enough strength to escape from this insane elf. A short while later, the scene shifts to the other prince who, furious, says that the only advantage the protagonist has over him is the damn birthright. Not long ago, his uncle suddenly declared that he supported him, and then took the flower of the Iron Lion Fortress, and now the guy is going after that elf. Either way, it makes no difference because he has a duel scheduled with him soon. The guy didn't have very good intentions, and a little later, the moment of the duel had finally arrived. Wow, that fast. Our boy was totally calm. And then the other prince says he prepared a lot and even brought some spectators, asking if his brother liked it. Honestly, he hopes he won't disappoint the audience's expectations. And Idrian says he had noticed it before, but he really talks too much. And the pissed-off brat charges straight at Idrian all at once, who says that before, he was only going to play around with him a little. But he ended up getting very busy lately. The poor guy falls to the ground in just a few seconds, and everyone watches in surprise. The same goes for the other knight, wondering if this is really the first prince he knows. With everything settled, the winner of the duel has already been declared, and Idrian wastes no time and leaves that place right away. Sometime later, rumors began to spread that Prince Gilhan had lost to Idrian. Soon after, the boy wakes up, asking them to prepare his equipment because he's going back to decide the winner. Wow, this guy really doesn't give up. Meanwhile, the other knight appears, saying that the prince left the capital with Count Valahard immediately after the duel. He said he was going north, where the Valahard family lives. On the way to the blessed place, Valahard says he's gotten pretty good at riding a horse, and Idrian says that isn't hard, right? Changing the subject, he wanted to know why he was in such a hurry. After all, the banquet ended only a short while ago, and he should rest for a few days, and Idrian says there is no place for him in the capital. He has no intention of staying with those who don't recognize the master of their own country and keep licking the boots of the empire's dogs. Besides, he fits in much better with the knights than the nobles, and his uncle says they aren't as calculating as the nobles, but they are much more conservative. They keep up that boring conversation, and his uncle says he can't help feeling that he's being very reckless. And Idrian thinks that if he ends up taking too long, he'll marry that lunatic. And in the past, everyone who did that met their end. He needs to gain strength before that happens. To speed up his growth, there is a specific place to become stronger. The place where all humans are tested to the limit and where most martial poems were born. And that is obviously the battlefield, right? At that, Valahard says that these valleys are the Blade Mountains, and the frontier his family has protected their whole lives. Meanwhile, the protagonist was shivering from the cold, saying he'll have to get used to it soon. And looking to the side, Arwen was also there, seeming to feel cold. Idrian asks how she is, and she says she's fine. So Idrian says that if it gets hard, she can switch with someone at any time. But she says there's no way a knight can seek personal comfort. And Idrian thinks it's a good thing there's at least someone full of motivation. On the other hand, everyone else is complaining about being dragged there under royal orders. If Carls were there, he would have already dealt with them. And then a flashback appears with the king saying that the royal knights are not his personal knights. Basically, that's why Carls couldn't go north with them. And even if this body has made many mistakes, it is still his flesh and blood. Anyway, the king's attitude seems a bit excessive, and there clearly must be a story behind it. Soon after, Valahard tells them to pick up the pace, because otherwise they'll get stuck in the middle of the storm. And so time keeps passing, and Valahard tells them to leave the carriages behind and just take the horses and continue on foot. Idrian thinks the guy even used mana to shout. And then our hero calls for Adelia, and helping the girl get down. At the same time, Arwen appears asking if he was okay. Meanwhile, the storm was getting stronger and stronger, and Idrian, starting to get really pissed off, tells Arwen to take care of Adelia, ordering the idiots to drop their shields. Something like that will only make the wind carry them away, so they have to drop everything heavy except their swords. Every step in the storm felt very heavy, and to make matters worse, everyone was already exhausted. Some people were starting to fall behind, and Idrian, returning to the front, picks up the man who had fallen to the ground, and starts carrying him. Man, this guy is a beast. They keep marching toward the place they wanted to reach, and finally they find the fortress. The funniest thing is that damn storm had ended only when they arrived at that place, and the sky even cleared up as if the storm had been an illusion. At that, Valahard steps in front of the gate, saying that, as the ruler of that place and commander of the kingdom's 3rd Legion, he welcomes the first prince. The kid looks around all happy, and his uncle welcomes him to Winter Castle. Winter Castle is a fortress located in the far north of the kingdom, and an anti-monster fortress that exists to stop them. For ordinary soldiers, it is the worst posting possible, and nobles from all over the world may try to assess the political prestige of Winter Castle. However, for those who were born and raised there, it is a place that becomes the duty and pride of a lifetime. Next, the man there says his name is Vicente, and starting today, he will end his duties as acting commander and return as commander of the Ranger Company, saying he was glad his father had returned safely, and Valahard says he did an excellent job. Neither I nor the protagonist could believe it, asking if his uncle had a son, and now that he thought about it, they really did look alike. And to make matters worse, their personalities were similar too. Right after that, Valahard introduces the protagonist, saying that this is Prince Idrian, and the boy, bowing, says his name is Vicente of the Valahard family. Looking down at him, Idrian says it's a pleasure to meet him, and Vicente, furious, thinks that the Winter Castle is a fortress of royal warriors who risk their lives for noble beliefs, and not a place for an idiot who was kicked out of the capital to wander around with women. Things were already starting off with misunderstandings, and the guy still wanted to know why he had brought his father there again, asking him what the hell was going on. He says that as he heard, he decided to become the boy's mentor, and that he'll be staying in the kingdom for now. Not understanding anything, his son asks if he hadn't abandoned the protagonist because he was an idiot. Hearing that, the old man looks away, saying that people are destined to change. So there's only one thing he wants to ask, so he should try to observe our boy without any kind of prejudice. With that, time passes, and Valahard asks how the clearing of monsters from the villages is going. Vincent says they've been steadily reducing the numbers, but there are still some places left uncleared, and now that his father has arrived, they'll act. Our boy keeps watching the conversation, and the guy over there says that the current problem is the orcs. A small group of fewer than 20 has settled at the entrance to the mountain range, and at that size, it would be difficult for the rangers to fight using only arrows. That's why they're selecting knights at the castle. And Idrian cuts into the conversation saying that he'll take care of this mess. The guy beside him says that the orcs in the mountain range are different from ordinary orcs, and if things go wrong, there could even be problems with the ranger's operation. Hearing that, Idrian then calls his uncle, who asks his son what the size and strength of the confirmed orcs are. So far, at most 20 have been sighted, and although the presence of an orc warrior or shaman hasn't been confirmed, the possibility that they exist can't be ruled out. Right after that, Valahard asks whether Idrian was confident, and immediately, Vincent says that entrance is one of the main routes used by the Rangers, and if it happens to become a battlefield, future work will be much more difficult. If there's any problem with the prince's safety, Valahard's position will also become difficult. And hearing all that, Idrian thinks his uncle raised a very intelligent son. They continue with the process of organizing the strategy, and Vincent didn't seem very happy about it. A short while later, our hero was giving that news to his knights, mentioning that he had received the mission to subjugate the orcs, and the number of enemies was 20. The guy over there tries to come up with an excuse, saying that his mission is only to escort the prince. However, Idrian says that's great, since they'll have to follow him if they want to protect him. Well, with everything settled, the young man leaves thinking that, whether he likes it or not, they are the soldiers assigned to him, so he'll have to train them to be useful. They didn't seem very reliable at first glance, but since they were the elite selected by the family, they at least had decent skills. Even if some of the others seemed suspicious, since their specialty was interrogation and disguise, right? A little later, the one who would guide the protagonist would be Vicente himself, who says the prince may not know it, but if this operation fails, he'll face a bigger obstacle than he imagines. The two stay there in that healthy rivalry, and at that very moment a system appears for Idrian informing him that it is impossible to view the status window. And right away, Idrian thinks the guy is at least a triple chain knight. Only one of the knights behind them is a real ranger, and the rest are knights pretending to be ordinary rangers. They probably intend to handle things on their own if necessary, but he's going to ignore that since they don't know him. And without wasting time, the mission was about to begin. As time passes, Vicente says they must walk while conserving as much energy as possible, and if their energy runs out, their hands and feet will freeze and they won't fight well either. The guy keeps talking, and Idrian thinks the kid is even more talkative than his own father. At that very moment, they hear a noise, and one of the soldiers, without wasting time, grabs a spyglass, noticing that there were more orcs ahead. Those monsters there didn't seem very friendly, and the soldier asks how they were going to proceed. And of course, my friend, they were going to charge in all at once, right? And at that very moment, one of the orcs notices their presence. The whole group stares at the protagonist, who thinks it's been a very long time. At once, a bunch of arrows are aimed at the monsters, which are struck by them. At the same time, our boy draws his sword, and leaping over one of the attacks, he drives his blade into that monster. He thinks that this was what he had always longed for. After all, the battlefield is his life. At that very moment, Arwen appears, saying it's dangerous, but he tells her not to interfere. The boy keeps his sword raised, thinking that more than 400 years ago, the orcs were not monsters, but one of the proud masters of the continent. This is no myth and no hero's tale, but there existed the song of a poor man who hated the orcs. So Idrian uses one of those chivalric poems once again, and man, a huge aura appears in the sky. The boy was ready for battle. At that very moment, a flashback appears, and the redhead says he heard that people die easily at Winter Castle, but the guy tells him not to worry because there won't be any reason to fight, asking what he thinks that useless prince is going to do by going there, and he'll definitely just stay holed up in the castle, trying to steal the achievements of his maternal uncle. The most important one isn't him, but his uncle, and all he needs to do is watch Winter Castle's movements and report to him if anything suspicious happens. And handing over a bag of money, he asks if he can do that. The guy, full of confidence, says of course he can, but back in the present, it's the complete opposite. The battle is still raging, and the poor guy was trembling with fear, not knowing what he should do. In his desperation, he charges at one of the monsters, but he is easily subdued. At that very moment, Arwen appears, defeating the creature easily. The huge beast falls to the ground, and the girl says this is a battlefield, and they must not lower their weapons carelessly. The guy accepts it all without question, but there's no time to catch his breath because the battle was still going on, right? Arwen tells all the troops to prepare for battle, thinking that their numbers are quite large, and it seems like it'll be hard to deal with all of them with only the men they currently have. However, my friend, at that very moment a sword pierces the monster's chest. Everyone was watching that in surprise, and man, our hero was not messing around. The kid was right in the middle of all those monsters, and he didn't seem even the slightest bit afraid, and without wasting time, he charges at the other orcs. A flashback appears in his mind, saying that no matter how many times that person killed, it simply wasn't enough, and always searching for the enemy, he wandered through the barren land dominated by the orcs. The mana in his heart had long since run out, But even so, that cursed person did not stop. And with every step he took, the man grew older and much weaker. The demonic sword in his hands was what kept him going. And for that old man's final wish, he was burning away the rest of his life force. He was just another one of those men who in his past had lost his wife and daughter because of that race. Basically, just another one of those damn cycles of revenge. And finally, when he found the enemy of his entire life, unfortunately, he was already completely broken. Even so, he advanced toward the creature, but obviously, it was not enough ending that cursed cycle right there. The man, already overtaken by old age, had fallen to the ground. But even so, he had not given up until the end. That was just one more story that was never told to anyone, and that not a single person ever knew. How he was a sword back then, he will be the only one to remember all of that. And back in the present, all the orcs had already been defeated. At least on the side where the protagonist was, right, my friend? Because on the other battlefield, everyone was still struggling. While Idrian holds his sword, he thinks that he finally remembers. To be more specific, it's the so-called Poem of Vengeance, which is an unfinished song. Anyway, he needs to finish the damned verse, and without wasting time, he keeps advancing toward those orcs without stopping. Our hero was completely focused on the battlefield, and the system notifies him that a new verse has been added to the Poem of Vengeance. And reciting the damned poem, he says that he stands before those monsters to honor that man's soul. The system informs him that the Poem of Vengeance has become a requiem poem, and looking to the side, the battle had finally ended, and Vincent, breaking a banner, says that the orcs were completely annihilated. Victory was theirs, and Idrian asks if that guy over there wasn't called Vincent. That man from before threw his life away in the past, hoping for the annihilation of the orcs. And to think that this man would have the same name as that guy, it's even a coincidence because that old man says that in his next life, he'll definitely wipe out that race. A short while later, Vincent, holding the red banner, asks the protagonist to take it because it is his battalion's tradition that the soldier who fought best gets to take the enemy's banner. Basically, a trophy of victory that could not be replaced by anything, and its owner would specifically be the protagonist. Right after that, Arwen calls for Your Highness, saying that she admires his incredible bravery in battle. Suddenly, all the soldiers bow before him, and the kid just watches, all happy. Raising the banner, he says that they had triumphed over those orcs. And so, all the soldiers finally acknowledge our hero, welcoming him to Winter Castle. Honestly, the kid was really happy that he had gotten that banner, saying that he is its rightful owner. And right after that, Vincent, all smug, says he has 16 of them. Wow, now it's turned into a competition, my friend. Hearing that, Idrian watches in silence. And then, my friend, he completely ignores the guy and says again that that banner is rightfully his. A few minutes later, everyone was setting the orcs' camp on fire. And Vincent says that considering they fought the elite orc combat unit, there weren't that many casualties. Arwen says that even so, it's still a pity. And Vincent says that victory is tribute enough for the fallen. Consoling the spirits of the dead with the blood of their enemies is how the Valohard family does things. And hearing that, our boy immediately seems to recognize that young man, wondering if he could be the reincarnation of that person. Right after that, he asks if the Third Legion had always been following them like this. And the guy, coming up with an excuse, says they just happened to run into a troop of rangers nearby, so they joined forces. And Idrian says that's an incredible coincidence. But of course, the kid isn't going to believe that, thinking that apparently Vincent didn't trust him much and set this up in secret, right? Then Vincent says it's strange that an elite orc troop came all the way down to the foot of the mountain and none of the rangers detected their movements. In any case, the best option would be to return to the castle, and not long after, they had already returned, and Valohard says they had done an excellent job, congratulating them on returning safely. Idrian was still all excited because he had gotten that flag, man. This is already getting annoying. Watching that, the soldiers say he was already doing it for the 11th time. But my friend, the young man was simply ignored. Vincent tells his father that the orc combat unit appeared far too early. Maybe they found some large prey, or something happened in the mountains. Honestly, neither of those situations would be good for them. And right after that, his father says he would like to let him rest. But the situation is urgent, asking him to follow him for now. Everyone starts going into the castle. And at the same time, Vincent looks at our hero saying that his performance had been impressive. Hearing that, our boy doesn't understand anything, asking if he doesn't think he's kind of strange. And Arwen says that it's because he's a cold man, and must have felt embarrassed to change his attitude so suddenly. At that very moment, Adelia appears, happy that he arrived safely. Now you already know what's going to happen, right? And the kid, picking up the flag once again, asks if she knows what this is. My God, I can't take this anymore. Then time passes, and Vincent says that in a few days, a scout unit will be organized to check the situation in the mountains. They can't know what will happen in that place, and they plan to select only elite people who can professionally explore the mountains. For that reason, Your Highness does not need to get involved in this mission. The protagonist asks why he came to his room to tell him what had already been said at the meeting, and the boy says the commander personally ordered it. And right then, Idrian realizes that his uncle was probably trying to get them to become close, though to be fair, that isn't so difficult, right? And after sending the guy away, the kid was deep in thought, looking once again at that flag. Please, don't start this again. He thinks that in that battle he was deeply immersed and it was his first time reciting an epic poem in full. He'll probably experience similar things in the future. The poems he has aren't exactly his, but in any case, he had to make them his own. At that very moment, our boy hears a noise, and looking to the side, there was a little bird at the window. But my friend, that little thing didn't seem very friendly, huh? Adrian thinks it's obvious who had sent it, and at that same moment, that thing starts talking, asking if he liked the gift she had sent. Adrian looks at it, horrified, asking if that battalion of orcs that appeared at the foot of the mountain was because of her. And she says she only wanted to give your highness an adversary worthy of you. I hoped you would receive this gift warmly. And Adrian thinks that even after dozens of patrolmen died because of that, she talks as if nothing had happened. Elves love watching everything from afar, and they must have enjoyed seeing them fight against the battalion of orcs they themselves lured there. So this is what they call goodwill. And right after that, he tells her to stop stalling and say what she wants already. The girl says he's very cold, but there's nothing to be done, since unrequited love always hurts, so she'll wait until the day he opens his heart. And speaking into the kid's ear, she mentions that deep in the mountain range, there is something he needs to see. There is an ancient being sleeping in those mountains, and if he takes advantage of this situation, he could create a very good poem. At that very moment, the little bird begins to deform, and the girl says that her connection was already running out. Right then, the little bird drops dead, and Adrian thinks that woman is annoying to the very last second. Obviously, it's clear what she wants. After all, she wants him to create a new heroic chant. But in any case, he's going to play along with her game. And a little later, Vincent says that the patrolmen go in and out of the mountains as if it were their home. But even so, they only stay around the edges, because those who go deeper do not return. Their mission is to stop monsters from coming down the mountain, not specifically to explore inside it. Adrian, in turn, asks if that means no one knows what's in there. In the past, all the mysteries of the world were unraveled by knights seeking transcendence, but that place remained untouched and is a kind of taboo, right? In any case, now that he's assessing the situation, it was very good to have gone to that place. And right after that, Vincent says that just to be safe, they shouldn't even consider going deeper into those mountains. Adrian tells him to relax because he won't, but my friend, you know very well that of course he's going to do it, right? Thinking that he won't, at least not for now. See, I told you, man. A short time later, Adrian, while cleaning his sword, wanted to know what was inside those mountains. It makes you want to go out and explore right now. However, he needs more battles and more victories. At that very moment, Valohard blows a horn, and right away everyone realizes it was an attack. All the knights take their positions and the protagonist appears. Then his uncle says that is the place. Further beyond the mountains, some soldiers were coming down, and Adrian wonders why the scouts were fleeing. Right then, my friend, a whole bunch of orcs appear riding wolves. Our hero realizes something is wrong, and his uncle says those monsters should have caught up to them long ago. The soldiers keep advancing toward the gate, and the soldier there says that at this rate they'll be slaughtered. If that's the case, he'll stay behind and hold them off. Also, his comrades can make it to the castle. And so, the poor guy passes on to a better place, but unfortunately even that wasn't enough for his comrades to make it out alive. Everyone was watching that situation from atop the wall, and Valohard says that all soldiers except the border guard could come down from the walls. All the warriors watch that situation in despair, and Adrian asks if he brought him there just to show him that, and his uncle says yes, because all of that was a trap, and if he had sent reinforcements, they would have been devoured too. Then Vincent appears, saying that common sense doesn't work against monsters. They don't care about their own lives, and a war of attrition is exactly what they want. In any case, winter has barely begun, so they can't act on impulse. At that very moment, those monsters begin advancing toward the gate, and one of the soldiers, with a spyglass in hand, looks at one of the soldiers realizing that he was still alive. However, that doesn't change the fact that there are still a ton of monsters, and Valohard, watching the situation, says that this winter is different from all the others. The protagonist wonders if that damned elf is involved too, and at that very moment, another orc, stronger than the others, appears. The huge monster lets out an insane roar, and Vincent says the monsters are going to execute him. However, the protagonist, holding the kid by the shoulder, says that's not it. They're not declaring an execution. Rather, more specifically, they're declaring a duel. With that, Adrian immediately understands what that elf had said about an ancient being sleeping within those mountains. And out of nowhere, the big beast starts speaking, saying that he will fight with honor and restore the name of his legion. All of this being done for the great king. Then Valohard asks if he's saying those orcs took hostages and are challenging them to a duel. Adrian says that's exactly it, but neither of the two seem to believe him. He says that if they don't want to believe him, then he'll show them personally. And from atop the wall, our hero says that he accepts the challenge, and everyone except the duelists must retreat 200 paces and dismount from the wolves. At that very moment, the orc is surprised, asking how a human can speak the tribe's language, supposing that he might have the blood of his people. But Adrian says he never learned any of that, asking what he intends to do. The orc, in turn, agrees to do that, saying that if he dares stain an honorable duel, he will not forgive him. The protagonist then asks if they believe him a little now, but the two of them didn't understand what he was talking about. However, my friend, at the same time, they understood what it was about. After all, literally all the orcs retreated, leaving only those who were going to duel. Valohard says he has spent dozens of winters in that place, but has never seen anything like it, and Idrian says they'll have to save their surprise for later. Those bastards' demands are simple. 5 participants for the duel, but they must be chosen from among those who fought in the Battle of the Mountain Range. With that, the group begins organizing their strategy, and Idrian, beside Arwen, says that 2 spots have already been filled. The soldiers are surprised, saying that this is very dangerous, but the kid asks who besides him would be able to talk to the orcs. Besides, he thinks he couldn't refuse someone that excited. Then he asks Arwen if she can do it, and without wasting any time, she says that of course she can. A few minutes later, Valohard asks where he learned to speak the orcs' language, because he spent his whole life thinking those things didn't even know how to communicate properly. And Idrian just tells him to study more, thinking that only the noble orcs who serve the tribe's king can speak the ancient language. With everything settled, everyone was already about to come down from the wall, and the group going into battle was finally decided. Man, things are starting to get interesting. The protagonist thinks there aren't many coincidences in this world, but the moment he entered it, elven envoys who had never visited the kingdom appeared out of nowhere, and for the first time in 400 years, the king of the orcs emerged from the north. Honestly, he has no idea what was happening, but now is not the time to be thinking about that, right? The moment to fight finally arrives, and the protagonist was feeling very confident. The king of the orcs watches the protagonist in silence, asking if he is his opponent, and Idrian asks if he didn't like it. But it's literally the opposite, because his spirit is the strongest among these men, and besides that, he is the worthiest. His body must surely be a rare delicacy. And then the protagonist says, it's funny that the first one to recognize him without any kind of prejudice was an orc. At that very moment, Vincent says that thing is far too strong, asking him to let him fight in his place, but he doesn't have time for that. After all, he had another fight, right? Those monsters didn't seem very ready to talk, and the two of them then take their battle stances. Idrian says that orcs don't wait around to duel like knights, and charging at the orc, he tells them to do whatever they can to survive. As time passes, the battle goes on, and honestly, it's impossible to tell who had the upper hand. The protagonist lands a blow on the orc king, but it barely had any effect. The monster says it's a shame he has such pitiful strength for a spirit like his, and the kid, summoning his mana heart, says that now they're going to do things properly. An aura envelops the entire battlefield, and Idrian thinks that the emotions awakened by hundreds of soldiers were exactly the same as those of that vengeful wanderer who once roamed the plains. And the more he thinks about it, the more certain he is that going to that place was the right choice. And activating all his power, he thanks the monster for waiting, mentioning that it will serve as an offering to become stronger, man. The kid isn't messing around.